This story follows the life of a high school student named Haruki, who is constantly bullied by some of his classmates. His dark and tormented life suddenly changes drastically when a beautiful new student who has just transferred to their school approaches him and offers him something unexpected. A transfer student has just arrived at his new school. He seems enthusiastic and excited about his new school, which isn't as large as the one in Tokyo. He's walking through the hallways trying to find his new classroom. However, as he passes the biology room, he seems to spot something interesting. In the biology classroom, a soaked student named Haruki is seen being bullied by 3 other students. A girl named Riona sits on top of Haruki to restrain him. At the same time, a student named Takagi is recording the situation with his cell phone. Another student named Orihara is holding a book titled All the Torture in the World, while also holding a bottle of water. Orihara guides his 2 friends to torture Haruki this time by simultaneously pouring water into Haruki's mouth and nose. Of course, this action makes the victim start to feel short of breath. The feeling of being threatened also makes Haruki fear death. These bullies knew that their actions hurt Haruki, but what they expected from the young man was that he would try harder so he could entertain them in his boredom at school. Haruki, who was short of breath, tried to breathe, but the water that began to enter his lungs made him cough and vomit the water that was forcibly infused earlier, which hit Riona, who was still on top of Haruki. Riona felt disgusted, but on the other hand, she also wanted to do something crazy. Riona wanted to know if they could still do it without having to pin down Haruki. Takagi wasn't sure because Haruki refused. Because of this, Takagi raised his fist and hit Haruki. The blow made Haruki bleed from his nose. The 3 bullies looked happy when they saw Haruki's nose bleed. They immediately immortalized Haruki's pitiful look. Just as they were about to repeat their actions, the transfer student who came saw and caught them red-handed. The young man offered himself to be strangled. Riona and her 2 friends didn't understand what the boy meant at all, but instead of an explanation, all they got from him was the name of a fool. The bullies were furious. Takagi immediately wanted to beat up the transfer student, but Riona stopped him, saying they shouldn't just hit their juniors. With good intentions, Riona stroked the transfer student's head and advised him to return to his class. However, the young man, unexpectedly, displayed an irritated expression and told the girl not to touch him. The transfer student didn't hold back and even insulted the 3 bullies implicitly by saying that there was something strange with 6 legs or more, and had 2 tongues, and that made him hate lowly people so much. Riona didn't understand the meaning of the words, while Takagi thought the transfer student was a stupid figure, because surely everyone would also hate the figure that the transfer student had just described. The transfer student suddenly took out a handkerchief and dipped it in the aquarium so that the handkerchief became completely wet. The bullies were surprised and did not know what the transfer student was doing. Takagi then did not stay silent and tried to pull the young man's hand. The transfer student was silent, but a moment later, he caught Takagi and covered his mouth with the wet handkerchief while saying that what he did to Orihara was an example of the right way to torture. Slowly, Takagi began to feel short of breath, and at the same time, Riona tried to warn the transfer student to let go of Orihara. Just as they were about to start causing a commotion, from outside the biology room, a silhouette of a teacher was seen pacing the hallway while saying a name as if he was looking for someone. Seeing the situation was dire, the bullies tried to escape from the situation so as not to be caught by the teacher outside the biology room. However, before they left the room, they gave a warning to the transfer student that if they ever met, they would not hesitate to send him to God, the young man. The biology room was silent, only Haruki and the beauty student were left. Haruki thanked the young man because he thought he had helped Haruki get out of his bad situation. Haruki was cleaning up the mess in the room while the transfer student asked him why he shouldn't try to fight back, because there were actually so many ways to escape the bullying situation. Haruki just stayed silent. Seeing that his question seemed like it wouldn't get an answer, the transfer student chose to leave Haruki in the room alone. But before actually leaving the room, Haruki said that even with fish, the situation will still be the same. Those who are the weakest will have a habit of attacking with small objects. The 3 people refused to stop Bull. Ying, even if Haruki tried to stop them, the consequence that would arise was that someone else would become the target of the 3 people's bullying. If that were the case, the bullying would never end. A person can never be at peace if they feel intimidated. These thoughts led Haruki to resign himself to being a victim of bullying. The transfer student was stunned by Haruki's explanation. A smile appeared on the handsome young man's lips. Haruki then returned to his class, and with his appearance still messy, there were many of his classmates wondered what had just happened to Haruki. Haruki's face looked messy while his clothes were still soaked. Haruki refused to explain the bullying situation he had just experienced in the biology room, and only gave a short answer that he was fine to those who had asked. The 3 bullies who had bullied Haruki in the biology room were Haruki's classmates. They also responded to Haruki's messy appearance, but still said that he was fine. Not to forget, the verbal taunts were also thrown as jokes that were not funny at all. Class was about to start, and a teacher had entered their classroom. Unusually, there was a new figure brought in by the teacher. The figure was a beautiful transfer student, but a man named Yukihime Takashi. He was a transfer student from Tokyo and also an eyewitness to the bullying case that befell Haruki in the biology room some time ago. His classmates were immediately captivated by Yuki's appearance, which looked beautiful yet handsome. Both male and female students in the class were already captivated by Yuki's appearance, especially her face. At the same time, Haruki's eyes widened in shock because he recognized the figure as the person who intervened in the bullying case and acted as his savior. Not only Haruki, but the 3 bullies also noticed and recognized Yuki. While they seemed a little surprised, they also seemed quite happy to have a new target. Like most transfer student introductions, the homeroom teacher who brought Yuki into the classroom asked the students to be friendly and befriend him. That day, there was a physical education class taught by a teacher named Onizuka. The students in the class seemed quite alert as they were about to attend Onizuka-sensei's lesson. It seemed Onizuka-sensei was a strict teacher with his teaching schedule, so all the students hurried to change into their gym uniforms so they wouldn't be late for Onizuka-sensei's class, as the consequences would be quite severe. At that time, Yuki had finished changing his clothes and was ready to go to the field, but his steps were blocked by Takagi and Orihara. The 2 bullies wanted to take out their anger on Yuki, who had disturbed them while bullying Haruki. Haruki came to mediate so that Yuki would not become the next victim, but instead, he received a direct punch from Takagi. The students who witnessed the bullying tried to ignore it and were reluctant to get involved. They were even immediately expelled by Takagi, so they would not interfere with his business. Orihara now grabbed Yuki's hair and pointed a cutter at the young man's neck. He intimidated and threatened Yuki that his actions this morning were quite annoying for them, and if Yuki continued to act like that in the future, they would not stay silent and give Yuki a very bad school life. They showed no mercy at all. When they had finished delivering their message, Takagi and Orihara then left, leaving Yuki and Haruki in the locker room. Yuki then tried to check the door, and sure enough, the 2 of them were trapped inside the locker room. Seeing that they couldn't get out immediately for gym class made Haruki quite scared. If they were late for gym class, the disciplinary action they would receive was hopping like rabbits 10 times around the schoolyard. On the field, Onizuka-sensei had already begun taking attendance of his students. The 3 bullies who were also attending the class seemed very happy to know that Yuki would later carry out the punishment with a body that looked frail. They couldn't wait to see Yuki's desperate look. From inside the locker room, Haruki began to panic because he saw Onizuka-sensei starting to take attendance. Haruki then tried many ways to get out of the room, and now he was going to call the school staff room so they could get out. Just as Haruki picked up his phone, in front of him was Yuki, lifting the lockers in the students' locker room. Of course, Haruki was very surprised by what Yuki would do. Outside on the field, Onizuka-sensei had arrived at Yuki's name, but did not find the student who owned the name. Onizuka-sensei also realized that Haruki was not there. Riona and her group giggled happily when they thought their plan was going smoothly. Suddenly, a locker from the locker room broke through the locker room glass and fell right near Onizuka-sensei and his stew. Dents gathered. Everyone who saw this was certainly shocked, but in this case the perpetrator acted normally. The one who had thrown the locker was Yuki. Haruki was shocked, but he seemed to know what Yuki would do next, but the young man was immediately afraid because at that time they were on the 2nd floor of the school building. Yuki was not afraid or hesitant at all. She was determined to stay down and attend the gym class guided by Onizuka-sensei. Because of the impact, Haruki would not move from his place. Shiryuki then acted and started to lift Haruki, carrying him like a princess, then jumped from the edge of the locker room window down directly to the field. Haruki panicked while Shiryuki managed to land calmly, of course, with Haruki in her arms. Onizuka-sensei looked surprised by the way his two students appeared, while Riona and her friends looked annoyed. Shiryuki immediately confirmed her presence to Onizuka-sensei, followed by Haruki. What Shiryuki did certainly caused a commotion among his friends. Many were amazed, many were shocked. Shiryuki was a transfer student with a handsome face but a posture that looked frail posture. The weak-looking young man had just thrown a clothes locker out of the locker room on the second floor. Not enough, Shiryuki also jumped from the locker room to the field while carrying Haruki. His strength seemed inversely proportional to his physical appearance. How the other students saw Shiryuki made the three bullies who were also there feel reluctant. The three then decided to leave Onizuka-sensei's class, despite Onizuka-sensei's own attempts to prevent it. Shiryuki and Haruki ended up getting punished by walking around the field with a bunny walk. Haruki ended up angry with Shiryuki, while Shiryuki tried to get closer to Haruki. Shiryuki only wanted to help Haruki, but Haruki didn't expect that help at all. Shiryuki's help for Haruki was something that bothered him. He wanted Shiryuki to act politely towards him. Haruki left, leaving Shiryuki still confused and silent. Afterward, Haruki experienced further bullying by Orihara and his gang. The bullies vented their frustration on Shiryuki by abusing Haruki. One of the bullies even intended to carve the words, "I'm a slave," onto Haruki's face with a box cutter. Their actions were accidentally witnessed by several kids from the baseball extracurricular. However, they were reluctant to get involved with the bullying gang, which was already quite well known at school. It wasn't just those two. Shiryuki was also up in the tree, watching them from the start. He saw how the two baseball players seemed reluctant to get involved. The bully gang's track record was disturbing. The victims were shown no mercy, even when they cried, and their hurt wasn't even heard. They continued to torture them under the pretext of punishment until they grew tired of it. Furthermore, several videos of the bullying were even circulated on social media. This meant that none of the bullies were hiding their actions. The abuse perpetrated by Orihara and his gang indirectly claimed lives. The victims suffered chronic psychological problems, leading them to return to God's lap. Many of their victims lacked mental fortitude. That's why they were quite happy with Haruki. Haruki persevered well despite their constant abuse. The outrageous act left no one brave enough to help the victim. Two members of the baseball club chose to leave and not retrieve their equipment, even though it would have meant canceling practice. Shiryuki seemed quite disappointed that no one dared to stand up to the intimidation. The next day at school, the three bullies waited boredly for Haruki's arrival, but it seemed that Haruki was late that day. Since his usual target hadn't arrived yet, they randomly chose another bully target in the classroom. None of them dared to fight back or defend the victim. Even Riona, a girl, didn't dare to fight back. They started thinking about taking their new target to the backyard so they could have more freedom to abuse him. That day's victims struggled against the bullies for forgiveness, but instead of being released, they got worse. Haruki had just arrived at the front door when he saw that the bullying that usually happened to him was now happening to someone else. Haruki remembered his old memory of a similar incident. In the past, Haruki witnessed with his own eyes a classmate being bullied severely. The target at that time whimpered for help, afraid that the bullies would finish him off. Haruki returned at this time. He couldn't bear it, then stopped the bullying and turned it on himself. The bullies seemed happy to see their favorite target had arrived. Haruki was immediately taken to the back to relieve the boredom of the three troublemakers. Shiryuki watched silently. In his mind, he asked why Haruki had to go alone. Shiryuki became curious to know Haruki more deeply. Therefore, Ryuki continued to follow Haruki wherever he went and was taken by the bullies. He knew everything that happened to Haruki. Until one day, Haruki was in the biology room. Haruki was quite calm while feeding the fish in the aquarium in the room. However, his composure was shattered when three of his bullies approached him. The three naughty students thought Haruki was trying to avoid them, but in reality, he wasn't. Riona then became interested in the aquarium's contents. Haruki tried to protect the fish, but Riona became irritated by his behavior. The bullies already knew that the fish in the aquarium were very important to Haruki. Haruki seemed to take very good care of them, and knowing this, they would surely steal the fish from him. This time Haruki spoke up. He begged the man to stop his work, but of course his pleas were meaningless. The bullying resumed. This time Haruki was forced to become a living aquarium for the fish. The decision to keep the fish alive or dead was Haruki's. When Takagi made Haruki into a living aquarium, the other two colleagues laughed and praised his actions, which they considered remarkable. It was only one fish, but Haruki's mouth was already full. There were still two more that Orihara would cram into Haruki soon. Haruki could no longer hold on and ended up vomiting the contents of his mouth. The fish then fell to the floor and was accidentally stepped on by Riona. Riona, disgusted because her shoes were dirty, then wiped her shoes on Haruki's head. Haruki looked terrible, not to mention the aquarium with the remaining fish was also deliberately dropped. Haruki rushed to grab the two fallen fish, hoping they could still be saved. The three bullies seemed happy to see Haruki starting to despair. Once satisfied, they left Haruki and went as they pleased. All of this was witnessed by Shiryuki from behind the window outside. Haruki couldn't save the remaining live fish. He ended up burying them under a tree. Shiryuki was there, asking Haruki if the young man would continue to let the situation continue like this. Haruki remained silent. His sorrow was greater. He still wouldn't change the situation and was willing to be a target as long as no one was killed. Haruki would rather be abused than watch others be beaten and hurt to the bone. It would be better for Haruki if he didn't drag others into his hell. Haruki's desperate words made Shiryuki even more interested in the young man. Shiryuki wanted to know the feelings he was feeling right now when he saw Haruki. His heart was beating so fast. Shiryuki was increasingly immersed in his curiosity about Haruki. He groped for what feelings he actually had for Haruki, until he finally concluded that his feelings might be love. Shiryuki confessed to Haruki that he had fallen in love with the desperate young man. Haruki was increasingly confused by the situation. Just a moment ago, he explained that he didn't want Shiryuki to stop him from making a sacrifice so that no one else would be victimized, but now he suddenly received a confession. Shiryuki wanted Haruki. Haruki was still confused by everything. Finally, Shiryuki asked what if there were no bullies? What if she eliminated their existence? Haruki became interested. He wanted to know if Shiryuki could eliminate them, and Shiryuki confidently agreed that she could. Shiryuki even promised Haruki. Meanwhile, the central bullies gathered. They were in dire straits because they didn't have enough money. Initially, their solution was to ask Haruki to bring them money, but then Riona had the idea to sell Haruki to a perverted old man. They agreed. Riona even planned to find 3 or 4 old male customers at once. Unbeknownst to anyone, Shiryuki was there observing their plans. The next day at school, Takagi, Riona, and Orihara were waiting for Haruki's arrival, but even at lunchtime, Haruki still hadn't arrived. Riona thought that maybe what they did to Haruki yesterday was too much, making the young man commit to return to God. They didn't seem to care because in their minds, the actions they did, such as bullying and abusing others, were very enjoyable, like what they had just done to Haruki yesterday in the biology room. Takagi was even more delighted when he saw Haruki's desperate look. He imagined Haruki begging him to stop. The situation even made him very excited. Takagi wanted to realize their plan to sell Haruki, so that afternoon, he opened a dating app for male lovers to see if any perverts were willing to buy Haruki. Takagi wanted to see Haruki's desperate face screaming from being worked on by his buyer. Not only that, Takagi even wanted to show the site to everyone. Not just Takagi, but also Orihara and Riona. The 3 high school students truly had evil intentions to sell Haruki and enjoy the proceeds. They even placed a vase of flowers on Haruki's table as a symbol of his death. One of the girls was disturbed by the commotion caused by the 3 men. But before she could realize her mistake, Takagi suddenly grabbed her assets and sexually assaulted her. Shiryuki entered the classroom and saw a vase of flowers on Haruki's desk. Takagi then greeted Shiryuki, who had just arrived, while saying that Haruki was dead. Orihara added that the reason why Haruki died was that Shiryuki interfered in their affairs. Haruki was said to have committed return to God because they bullied him too often until Haruki could no longer stand all the mental pressure he received. Shiryuki then calmly asked the 3 people why they bullied Haruki. Takagi then gave a short answer regarding the reason they bullied him was simply because they were bored. Takagi, Orihara and Riona then rushed out of the classroom. But before that, Takagi advised that because Haruki was no longer there, the next target of bullying was Shiryuki. Shiryuki took back a vase of flowers that had been on Haruki's table. He intended to give it to Haruki. Shiryuki looked around for Haruki, and when he arrived in front of the biology room, Shiryuki saw that the figure she was teaching was in the room. Shiryuki was about to go in to approach Haruki, but his intention was cancelled when he saw Haruki's shoulders shaking. From behind, Haruki was seen holding his temple, which was the place where Riona's shoe had landed earlier. The incident seemed to have left a mark and become a trauma for Haruki. Shiryuki decided to go in and ask Haruki if that day he would decide to start skipping school, but what Haruki wanted to do was not like that. He didn't want to waste his precious time skipping school, but Haruki didn't want to enter the same class as Takagi, Orihara, and Riona. Shiryuki then asked Haruki if the young man still remembered the promise Shiryuki had made to Haruki. Haruki looked confused and reluctant to answer, but Shiryuki reminded him again, emphasizing that they had promised that once Shiryuki managed to eliminate Takagi, Orihara, and Riona, they would officially date. After saying this, Shiryuki then told Haruki that he would wait for him in class. Shiryuki brought the flowers that had been in the vase. He placed them on the grave of Haruki's discus fish. Standing in front of the fish's grave, Shiryuki reaffirmed her commitment to Haruki. Elsewhere, Takagi, Orihara, and Riona were gathering for a smoke. Takagi's search led them to find customers willing to buy Haruki. One was a perverted old man who offered 100,000 yen for Haruki. They had found a customer, but what they hadn't seen that day was the creature they were selling Haruki. They were still trying to negotiate a time with the customer. Once they agreed, the three immediately divided up their tasks. The next day, Takagi and Orihara were quite happy to see Haruki already in class since morning. They planned to bring Haruki to their customer that day, but Orihara reminded Takagi that what they were going to do should not be found out by Shiryuki. After school, Haruki was taken by Takagi, Orihara, and Riona to a place. Takagi invited him to play somewhere, but when Haruki asked the reason, Takagi shouted at the young man and threatened to bully Shiryuki if Haruki refused to come along. Haruki was forced to come along. They arrived at a small station. Takagi insisted that Haruki wait. Haruki asked a question, but his question angered Takagi. Haruki received a punch from Takagi, which immediately silenced the young man. He could only wait and do as he was told. Having silenced Haruki, the three of them decided to bring the old man who had bought the clothes to Haruki. Takagi exchanged messages with his customer. From the messages, they learned that the money had been placed in a changing room 500 meters away. Now that they had the key, the next step was to retrieve the money. Takagi received another message that the old man had found Haruki. The next message offered Takagi the chance to watch the old man devour Haruki. The old man admitted he liked being watched while he was performing. He even offered an additional 100,000 yen if Takagi would watch. Takagi considered the offer very lucrative. He didn't intend to tell Orihara and Riona, so he could enjoy the benefits alone. Takagi hurried to the location indicated in the message. The directions led Takagi into a fairly dark alleyway. He was almost there. Takagi was quite enthusiastic. He was excited to see Haruki's facial expression as the old man who bought him worked on it. With his cell phone camera on standby, Takagi immediately opened the door to the room indicated in the message. He was shocked to see the room filled with tattooed men who resembled thugs, or worse, gangsters. One of the tattooed men chased Takagi. Takagi ran as fast as she could to escape and escape the man's pursuit. She didn't have time to get her money. While running away, a hand and a voice guided her somewhere. Without thinking, Takagi followed the directions, even though she didn't know who was behind. The voice and hand. Takagi ran quite far, even entering a forest area. Upon regaining consciousness, Takagi felt nothing but gratitude for escaping the terrifying man's pursuit. However, he was shocked to see a figure in a cloak standing there. Takagi was even more shocked to discover that the cloak was Shiryuki. Takagi thanks Shiryuki. This time, Shiryuki is like a savior for Takagi in a difficult situation. Takagi still doesn't understand what is happening. Shiryuki then speaks and tells Takagi that the forest area they are in this time is very different from Tokyo. The large forest where they are standing this time is very comfortable for Shiryuki. Takagi is confused about what Shiryuki is talking about. Suddenly, Shiryuki hits Takagi with a hammer. Shiryuki continued, explaining that in that place, no one would know what they were doing. They wouldn't have to worry about anyone accidentally seeing them. Takagi tried to stop the bleeding from his nose and mouth. He was confused by what he was experiencing at that moment. Shiryuki continued her actions, this time striking Takagi with the hammer until it impaled him. Takagi, almost unconscious, asked why Shiryuki was abusing him. Of course, Shiryuki happily replied that he did it out of boredom. Shiryuki also verbally abused Takagi, who was beginning to lose consciousness. The young man then retrieved the hammer and resumed his torture. Time passed and the day had changed, and it was already morning. Takagi woke up after all the torture Shiryuki had inflicted. He was greeted by Shiryuki that morning, who said that Takagi's wake-up time was perfect for the preparations Shiryuki had made for him. Takagi was tied by Shiryuki to a tree, with a tree trunk with a conical tip between his legs. Takagi felt so tortured. He screamed and said that he would never forgive Shiryuki. Shiryuki didn't want to hear it. Takagi's chatter was too noisy, even though Haruki was suffering more than Takagi right now. Takagi didn't want to be compared to Haruki. For Takagi, Haruki was a weak man who kept crying over the death of his fish. Takagi just realized that Shiryuki did those things to Takagi solely for Haruki. Takagi began to suspect that Shiryuki had feelings for Haruki. With that suspicion, Takagi then said that Haruki was destroyed. He said this so that Shiryuki would be affected. Takagi even mentioned Haruki's past, where he had experienced sexual harassment from Riona. Shiryuki wanted to know if Takagi was that happy watching Haruki suffer. Takagi confirmed it. He was thrilled to see Haruki begging him and his two other friends to stop their torture. Haruki, while receiving Riona's abuse, kept whining and begging for him to stop, but none of his moans were heard. Shiryuki had had enough of Takagi's ranting. He then explained that the purpose of torture was to instill remorse and psychological damage in the target through manipulation. Seeing Takagi's apparent lack of remorse, Shiryuki gave up. Takagi was beyond repair. Ultimately, Shiryuki chose to send Takagi to hell, believing he would never repent. Shiryuki landed a single blow on Takagi, and the young man immediately screamed in pain. Shiryuki's only regret was that only the animals and trees had heard Takagi's final words. Shiryuki truly wished there was someone who could witness Takagi's end. Takagi knew his end would not be far off. Shiryuki repeated the action as many times as she pleased. Shiryuki had deleted all of Haruki's videos. He had even set up a fingerprint on Takagi's phone. He had seen countless other people's videos, but Shiryuki was only interested in Haruki. Shiryuki was curious and asked what it felt like to be a victim to Takagi. Takagi whimpered and begged to be let go. He promised not to bully Haruki again, but Shiryuki didn't care. Shiryuki asks why he should let Takagi go. He believes a bully should be punished. Another reason Shiryuki doesn't let Takagi go is because if Takagi doesn't disappear, Haruki won't date him. Shiryuki's sentence doesn't get any response from Takagi. Shiryuki wonders why the young man doesn't answer. Upon further inspection, it turns out that Takagi's existence will now disappear completely from the world. It's time for Shiryuki to catch Haruki's other bully. Shiryuki's next target is Riona, the girl who stomped on Haruki's precious fish. There are only 2 more targets left until Shiryuki can date Haruki. At school, Orihara and Riona began searching for Takagi, who never came. Not only that, but even Riona's messages were not read by Takagi. Takagi's disappearance occurred after they planned to sell Haruki, therefore, Haruki became the target again. Orihara approached Haruki to ask about Takagi's whereabouts, but Haruki himself did not know where Takagi had gone. Haruki only remembered that yesterday, Takagi called him to the bathroom and then beat him until he was unconscious. Then after a while, he had to wake up, but Takagi was not around him. Therefore, Haruki decided to go home. After that, he never saw Takagi again. Orihara and Riona did not believe what Haruki had just said and even accused the young man of lying to them. Orihara and Riona demanded that Haruki tell the truth and tell them where Takagi was. While the two still believed Haruki was lying, they overheard other students discussing the sighting of Takagi yesterday. The student who saw Takagi was a student whose house was near the spot where Takagi was chased by the black mob. From this story, they concluded that there must be a connection between what they saw and why Takagi didn't come to school that day. Orihara and Riona exchanged a look of surprise, especially when the student mentioned the black community. They couldn't fathom what Takagi had done. While the two bullies were confused, Shiryuki sat silently watching them from his seat. The beautiful young man smiled when the name of the black community was mentioned. The group's name didn't have a good representation in society, so if Takagi was really gone for a long time, his family and school wouldn't do much or care because of his connection to the black community. Not only that, the forest where Takagi was killed was very large and not many people came to visit, so it wouldn't be easy for Takagi's body to be found. Even if Takagi's body was found, the police would consider the black community the main suspect. Shiryuki, who had successfully eliminated one of Haruki's 3 bullies that day, felt in a very good mood. It was time for class to change. Shiryuki got up to invite Haruki to go to the next class together. At the same time, Orihara and Riona began to wonder what they should do about Takagi's disappearance. Riona couldn't believe what she had just heard, so the only solution Riona could propose to Orihara was to maximize their efforts to find Takagi with their own hands. Before Takagi died, when the dying young man still had a little consciousness, Shiryuki asked Takagi about who Riona was. Takagi, intimidated by Shiryuki, then explained that her Yama Riona was a girl who was still a virgin. That fact was quite impossible to be true, but the fact was clear. Riona was a figure who was very loyal to the name of the person she loved, and that person was her uncle. Takagi told how crazy Riona was regarding things related to her uncle because the girl was very obsessed with the man. Riona even immediately responded to a joke thrown by her friend, who said that a girl could not marry her uncle. The girl who had thrown the tent then became the target of Riona, and not only that, Riona even asked for help from Takagi and Orihara to molest the girl. Takagi had told him everything he knew about Riona. Therefore, he demanded Shiryuki's release, but the beautiful young man only became more convinced that Takagi, Riona, and Orihara were completely incompetent. Back during class, the majority of the students tried to focus on the teacher's explanation. Shiryuki arranged the board with a smile, wondering what she could do from now on. While the class was in session, it didn't stop Riona and Orihara's bullying. The target this time wasn't their classmates, but the teacher who was trying to explain things to the students. The homeroom teacher seemed disturbed by Riona's actions. The man clearly showed a very annoyed face at the girl. Previously, the teacher named Tokieta had intended to report the bullies during a teacher's meeting, but before that was done, Tokieta was first led to a place by Takagi, Orihara, and Riona. They then created an action scenario that showed scenes such as Tokieta trying to harass Riona, but the actual incident was the opposite. When the teacher was harassed, Riona recorded a video of the incident. Now, Tokieta is obedient to Riona, Takagi, and Orihara. When class was over, Riona tried to ask Haruki to hang out with her the next day. Riona asked Haruki on a date. The girl initially acted indifferent when Haruki refused her invitation, but Haruki eventually agreed to the date. It was not without reason. It turned out that Riona asked Haruki on a date so that her goal of selling Haruki to several old men could continue. Riona had become too comfortable torturing Haruki. The girl was increasingly impatient to meet Haruki the next day and sell him to the old man. Haruki was about to leave the classroom, but Shiryuki stopped him and asked if he was going on a date with Riona. Haruki didn't want to make a big deal out of it because no matter what, he would still be a victim in the end. Shiryuki was confused about how Haruki could feel okay being a victim. He also said that the weather had been raining a lot lately, and dating during that season would be a bit annoying. Shiryuki began to wonder. If Haruki wasn't going to be bullied anymore, what kind of face would he show Shiryuki? Class time has ended. Now the students are allowed to go home. The students say goodbye to each her, but at the same time, Haruki is confused as why Shiryuki is still following him. He asks Shiryuki the reason, but Shiryuki answers that it is Haruki himself. The reason why Shiryuki follows Haruki is Haruki. Haruki begins to suspect whether there is a possibility that Shiryuki is genuinely worried about him. Haruki begins to wonder if Shiryuki's words about eliminating the bullies are true. Haruki feels uncertain, especially since they still don't know each other very well. Shiryuki still wanted to go wherever Haruki went, and that afternoon they walked together to Inukai-sensei's office, in the biology room. Shiryuki made small talk, saying that she honestly didn't understand much about biology, but Haruki was confused because the key to the biology room had to be found to open it. Haruki found the situation quite odd, as the biology room door was usually always open. The only possible reason for the lock was that Inukai-sensei wasn't in the office at the time. Haruki gave up looking for the key and intended to return the next day. The young man then left, leaving Sir Yuki alone. As Haruki turned around, Sir Yuki sensed something behind the door. Haruki noticed his shift in focus and asked if something was wrong. Sir Yuki replied that nothing was wrong and then left with Haruki. From behind the door, inside the biology room, Inukai-sensei was actually attempting to hang himself. Elsewhere, Riona was meeting a man. The man seemed attentive to Riona. Riona maintained her attitude of being kind and sweet in front of the man. She even lied that she was close to her teacher at school. The man was Riona's uncle. Hearing Riona's story made the man reminisce a little about his past in high school. Talking about high school life, it would always be about romance. The man asked Riona if she had a crush on someone. Riona answered honestly that there was someone she liked. Riona seemed very happy talking to her uncle. She mentioned that his birthday was coming up soon. Riona explained that she had a part-time job so she could buy him a present this time. Her uncle seemed quite pleased and eagerly awaited his niece's gift. Shortly after, her uncle had to leave on urgent business. The two parted ways and returned to their respective activities. As soon as her uncle left, Riona's expression returned to its original state. She was upset that she couldn't give her uncle a gift that day and spend more time with the man she loved. That evening, as Riona walked home alone, she had already booked a nice hotel room for herself and her uncle. She planned to have dinner with him. Riona was in a desperate rush to sell Haruki as soon as possible to get the money. She was well aware that her uncle liked good girls, so she would never be able to honestly ask where the money to buy him the gift came from. Suddenly, someone grabbed Riona's wrist. It was Sir Yuki. Riona was surprised when Sir Yuki suddenly appeared in front of her. Sir Yuki asked the same thing he had asked Takagi, namely, why Riona bullied Haruki. If Sir Yuki had an assumption that the girl might like Haruki, Riona did not accept it. Where did the assumption come from? Sir Yuki was just guessing because, according to him, there are people who deliberately bully the people they like. Maybe Riona is that type of person, but Riona immediately denied the assumption. Riona will never be able to like Haruki because, according to her, Haruki is not handsome. Sir Yuki tightly gripped Riona's wrist and asked if she would bully Haruki again. Riona didn't answer but instead groaned in pain. Riona began to cry and whimper. She promised not to bother or bully Haruki again from then on. Sir Yuki wanted to make sure Riona would keep her promise. Riona answered briefly. Sir Yuki let go of her wrist and they began to part ways. Sir Yuki once again asked to make sure that Riona didn't like Haruki. When he was sure of the answer he received, Sir Yuki smiled and left. As soon as Sir Yuki was out of sight, Riona changed her attitude again. The girl was just lying. She wouldn't improve her attitude towards Haruki because bullying Haruki was a fun activity for the girl. Riona immediately opened her phone because she knew she was in dire need of money. Not only Haruki, but now Riona intended to sell Sir Yuki too, so that the profits she would get could double. All of this was done to commemorate her uncle's birthday, which had to be special. Riona thought enthusiastically about what gift might be suitable for her to give to her beloved uncle. Suddenly, from behind the bushes, a man appeared and smothered and drugged Riona from behind. Behind the scenes, Sir Yuki could be seen from a distance holding his cell phone. It seemed that the man who had just smothed Riona had obtained information about the girl through Sir Yuki. An unconscious Riona was taken to an empty building and tied to a chair. The man who had smothered and carried her was Inukai-sensei, a teacher who had lost his authority and respect among his students due to the actions of Riona and her friends. Inukai-sensei forcibly woke the unconscious Riona, claiming that students were forbidden from napping in class. Riona then woke up and was shocked to find Inukai-sensei in front of her. The girl was confused as to why she suddenly found herself in this situation. Inukai-sensei shouted and ordered Riona to stop talking because he was about to start his class. According to Inukai-sensei, someone like Riona desperately needed his guidance. Sir Yuki observed the situation from a distance without wanting to get involved. He simply wanted to know how Inukai-sensei would properly educate Riona. Flashback when Haruki tried to open the biology room, but it was locked, and he chose to return the next day. At that time, Sir Yuki realized something and chose not to go home with Haruki and said goodbye with the excuse that the English teacher needed Sir Yuki. He did not forget to add that day, Haruki had to go home alone. Honestly, he had to be alone, never said that he and Shiryuki would go home together. As soon as they parted, Shiryuki tried to see the inside of the biology room from the yard outside the window. He heard a sound coming from inside the room. Shiryuki then picked up a stone and broke the biology room window from the outside so he could get in. When he entered the room, he found Inukai-sensei hanging from the ceiling, but still alive and trying to maintain the rest of his life. Shiryuki was quite curious about what Inukai-sensei was doing in that place alone. Inukai-sensei didn't hear and was still struggling with his life. Shiryuki tried to guess that his homeroom teacher was trying to return to God by himself, but according to Shiryuki, Inukai was too good a person to be thrown away. Shiryuki could tell that Inukai-sensei had never thought of killing himself. The man only thought that he couldn't handle things like bullying because of what they had done to him before now. Shiryuki then approached Inukai-sensei and whispered. Shiryuki offered Inukai-sensei to take revenge first before the girl was truly taken by death. Back to the current timeline. Inukai-sensei, who had been allowed to vent his anger on Riona, no longer hesitated and held back. Riona still tried to avoid and asked for the bonds that wrapped around her body to be released immediately. Riona felt disgusted seeing the contents of her teacher's pants. Inukai-sensei suddenly shouted and discussed the case of a female student in Class B who had committed go to heaven some time ago, and behind the case, it turned out that Riona was also involved. Riona refused to be blamed. The girl felt innocent because the student who jumped from the top of the building was never asked to commit return to God independently. Riona only ever made the girl sleep with herself. After encouraging a girl to sleep with herself, Riona also laughed at the girl's actions, which also killed herself due to psychological damage. Riona laughed happily when she heard and recalled the incident. On the other hand, Inukai-sensei looked confused and wondered why the girl committed acts of bullying her peers. Inukai-sensei was at the peak of his emotions because he felt concerned about the fate of Riona's victim. The teacher felt empathy because he could also feel how much pain he felt when he was the target of bullying by an individual or group. Seeing how Inukai-sensei's face looked when angry made Riona shudder with fear. Inukai-sensei forcibly educates Riona while Shiryuki watches. After the lesson, Shiryuki is quite impressed with Inukai-sensei's extraordinary method of educating Riona. While continuing to stare at his phone, Shiryuki mutters that they need to let those fools who don't understand what it's like to experience pain firsthand. Riona was left alone in the abandoned building, her clothes disheveled. She looked depressed and frustrated, as the virginity she had tried so hard to preserve for her uncle had been forcibly taken. Her gaze was blank until a familiar male voice called her name. Riona was called by her uncle, who came for her. Riona, who saw her uncle coming, immediately ran to the man she loved. However, instead of a warm, comforting hug, Riona received a hard blow and a disgusted look. Her uncle pointed at the phone he was holding. The phone screen displayed a screen with a recording of Riona bullying another girl. Riona was wide-eyed and confused to explain. She didn't know where her uncle got the video. Her uncle only explained that he had just received a DM with the contents of the video from someone. Her uncle didn't expect his cute niece to act so cruelly. Riona tried to explain, but her uncle refused to listen. The uncle even refused to listen to the reasons and felt ashamed of having a relationship with Riona. Her uncle, the man Riona only loved, never wanted to see Riona again. Those words were a huge blow to Riona. The psychological impact she suffered led her to commit return to God, like her former bullying victims. News of Riona's situation had reached the school. Takagi was still missing, and at the same time, Inukai-sensei hadn't come in to teach. They had many questions, but no one answered them. Shiryuki felt at peace. He thought he could now understand people's feelings a little better than before. Haruki was surprised and then tried to call out to Shiryuki. Shiryuki noticed Haruki's presence. He asked Haruki what he needed from her. Haruki was a little suspicious of the previously cheerful Riona's disappearance. Shiryuki responded calmly to his suspicions, praising him for his understanding of others. He also suggested that Riona might regret Haruki's death. Shiryuki then asked if Haruki was happy about the disappearance of the bullies. Haruki didn't immediately confirm it, but the most important thing for him was that no one was hurt. Their class that day began, and Shiryuki started it with a happy feeling because there was only one more bully to get rid of before he could finally go on a date with Haruki and do various fun things together. While Shiryuki thought about the fun things he could do with Haruki, Haruki himself was still drowning in his gloomy feelings, while Orihara in the back seat looked very upset. During the break, Orihara then forcibly took Haruki to ask where Riona was because, from what Orihara knew, Riona had an agenda to date Haruki yesterday. Besides, the last contact with Takagi should also be Haruki. Orihara suspects that Haruki is involved in the disappearance of his two fellow bullies. Haruki is quite afraid of what Orihara will do to him, but he doesn't know anything about the disappearance of the two temple friends. Orihara thought Haruki would be happy if Takagi and Riona disappeared, because it could be assumed that his bullies were no longer there. However, Orihara is still there, and never has any intention of letting go of Haruki forever. That day, Orihara was deeply upset by Takagi's disappearance and Riona's go to hell. The young man began to wonder if his friends had been arrested by someone holding a grudge against them. However, when this assumption arose, Orihara had many people in mind who could have carried out the grudge. He began to think that the perpetrator might have been a victim of bullying they had previously bullied, but even so, this didn't stop Orihara from suppressing his bullying. As Orihara entered the classroom, he overheard several girls discussing Shiryuki's charms. He then remembered that Shiryuki had always hung out with Haruki, and that many strange incidents had occurred since Shiryuki transferred to their school. With this assumption, Orihara had an idea that he thought was quite good. After school, Shiryuki wanted to go home with Haruki, but Haruki reminded him that the paths between their houses were opposite each other. Haruki didn't want to bother Shiryuki even though Shiryuki had volunteered. Coinciding with this, a teacher still had business with Shiryuki, so the young man had to stay at school first. When Shiryuki left with the teacher, that's when Haruki was approached by Orihara. Orihara took Haruki to an empty room and tied him to a chair. Haruki remained silent, but politely asked if Orihara could stop doing this to him. Orihara then replied that just because Takagi and Riona were gone didn't mean she would stop either. Orihara had dedicated himself to harassing Haruki, and even if she were found out, she would try to cover it up. Orihara then knocked Haruki unconscious. After a while, Shiryuki, having just finished dealing with the teacher, was about to go home and grab his shoes from his locker. However, when he opened his locker, Shiryuki found Haruki's cracked glasses along with a note that read, "I'll be waiting in the gym equipment room." Shiryuki complied with the handwritten note and went to the equipment shed to investigate. When the young man opened the door, he was greeted by Orihara, who announced that he had arrived in the torture room and that the seduction show was about to begin. Haruki lay unconscious beneath Orihara. Shiryuki asks Orihara what he's up to. The young man replies that he's aware of Shiryuki's closeness to Haruki, so he thinks that if Hara can defeat Shiryuki in front of Haruki, Haruki will be happy. Orihara expressed his suspicions about Takagi and Riona's disappearance, but he no longer cared. His days were starting to get boring, so Orihara admitted that he needed a new game. The reason the young man discussed this with Shiryuki was that he felt Shiryuki would be perfect for his new game. Orihara then took out a cutter and pointed it in front of Shiryuki, saying that he needed Shiryuki to be able to prove his existence, that Orihara was the king. Haruki seemed to be starting to regain consciousness, and this made Orihara happy because it meant he could torture Shiryuki when Haruki confronted him. But suddenly, Shiryuki took a chair and hit Haruki with it, causing Haruki to faint again. Orihara was very shocked and confused by what Shiryuki did, because he thought that Haruki and Shiryuki were very close friends, but Shiryuki was honestly also confused about their relationship, which would remain the same. He thought that Haruki was more important than him. This confession made Orihara even more confused. It had to be important to Shiryuki. He would get abused by Shiryuki himself. Shiryuki was reluctant to answer, but he only said that Orihara would definitely be in trouble if anyone saw. Shiryuki then approached Orihara and casually asked about any possible date spots. As the two got closer, Shiryuki whispered that Orihara was his final target and that he would do his best to make him enjoy the experience. Haruki awoke from his stupor and was greeted by the panicked presence of his gym teacher, who found him tied to a chair, unconscious. He vaguely remembered being with Orihara. A shadow of someone barged in as the bound Haruki fell from his chair. His memory was hazy, but what came to mind was sure Yuki. At the same time, in another location, Orihara had just regained consciousness. The young man was confused and wondered where he was. His vision was still blurry, but there were no enter stickers around him. Orihara was shocked to realize he was hanging upside down. Orihara was tightly bound and dangling upside down like a bat, his feet up and his head down. Before Orihara could finish his shock, he was startled again by the figure of Sure Yuki, who greeted the young man upon waking. With a happy expression, Sure Yuki remained very friendly to Orihara. Upon realizing he wasn't alone, Orihara was convinced that what was happening to him was Sure Yuki's doing. The young man then demanded answers about what Sure Yuki had actually done to him. With an innocent expression, Sure Yuki reminded Orihara that what he was doing now was because Orihara had previously said they would do something fun. Sure Yuki even reminded him that Orihara had promised him at that time. Orihara didn't understand what Sure Yuki was saying. Sure Yuki then reminded the young man that Orihara had previously invited him to have fun. At first, they were confused about what to do with their fun, but then Sure Yuki took the initiative to take an iron stool and smash it on Orihara. After hearing Sure Yuki's ramblings, Orihara remembered what had caused him to faint, and that was Sure Yuki. He then demanded to know why Sure Yuki had done this to him. Orihara even shouted and insisted on Sure Yuki untying the bonds that were attached to him, but the beautiful young man refused, as they were just about to begin what they had planned. Orihara no longer understood what Sure Yuki meant. Sure Yuki then said that they were right underneath an amusement park where there was a problem with the roller coaster. The roller coaster previously had a height of up to 50 meters, but was currently problematic and abandoned, where the problem was that the roller coaster stopped right at the top. When the incident was first discovered, 10 passengers waited for 2 hours without the arrival of even a tow truck. While waiting, the passengers were suspended in the air. In the middle of the story, Sure Yuki suddenly asked Orihara about what the young man thought, what happened, and what the result was. Orihara was still trying to calm himself, but his calm feeling was continuously disturbed by Sure Yuki's story, where the answer to the beautiful young man's question was that all passengers trapped on the roller coaster eventually died. Orihara began to feel anxious while Sure Yuki laughed heartily. The beautiful young man then pinched Orihara's cheek and played with it. Sure Yuki looked pleased and asked who Orihara might share the same goal with. Sure Yuki no longer played Orihara's cheek, but instead opened a book Orihara had previously read while bullying Haruki. The book was titled The Encyclopedia of Torture. Orihara remained free, but the bonds around his legs tightened. Sure Yuki then read the book, where the page he was reading stated that those who are hanging upside down experience 2 stages of suffering. Sure Yuki then explained clearly what those who are hanging like Orihara will experience. The first stage is when their blood will rush to the head, causing several effects such as headaches, dizziness, mental confusion, bulging eyeballs, and then the blood vessels will finally rupture. These symptoms will eventually cause bleeding and blood to flow from the eyes, nose, and mouth. That was just the first stage. The next stage occurs when the internal organization rises. This will break the pressure on the diaphragm. As a result, the victim will have difficulty or even be unable to breathe freely. The things Sure Yuki read were now happening directly to Orihara. Blood began to flow from his nose and the young man had been feeling dizzy. Orihara still wondered why this had happened to him. Slowly, Orihara could feel himself dying. Orihara remembers his childhood. From a young age, the young man felt that he should be king of all. He had already experienced the pleasure of being at the top when he was young. Orihara was like someone at the top of the food chain. Bullying was fun for him and his friends. Orihara loved seeing others feel inferior to him. When his victims begged him to stop, Orihara was resentful, considering the request an order. Orihara would escalate his actions if the victims begged for forgiveness. For him, no one should defy his will. A king would never accept orders. Orihara loved the frightened faces of his victims, their trembling legs, because it was the best sight for him. He considered them his slaves. Orihara had even caused the death of a young girl due to his actions. The young man, along with 2 of his high school friends, intimidated a girl into jumping off the edge of a bridge. They claimed it was just a joke, but the terrified girl complied and died in a dry riverbed. Despite his actions, he faced no legal repercussions, leading Orihara to believe he was someone who would always be forgiven, no matter what he did. Therefore, Orihara was determined to continue being a figure who was always above others in his hierarchy. That was his intention, but what was happening to him right now was so opposite that it made him wonder why it could happen. Shiryuki was still there in front of Orihara, even occasionally playing with the young man's face, who was hanging upside down. The beautiful young man continued to talk to Orihara, but unfortunately, Orihara could no longer focus because of the current situation. Shiryuki wanted them to play longer, but it was important for Orihara to be released first so they could play fairly. The pain Orihara felt grew stronger. The high school boy was certain that if the situation continued like this and didn't subside soon, he too would soon pass away. Suddenly, Orihara heard footsteps nearby. At that moment, Shiryuki accidentally discovered a piercing Orihara had on his tongue. Shiryuki then forcibly removed the piercing from Orihara's tongue without the slightest bit of guilt or pity. He then asked to confirm whether his target had reached its limit or not. He also wanted to know if Orihara had begun to feel his lungs being squeezed, making it difficult to breathe or not. Shiryuki's curiosity was ignored by Orihara. Orihara was more enthusiastic because he felt a glimmer of hope after hearing footsteps nearby. Although he initially doubted there would be anyone else in the rubble, Orihara refused to be pessimistic and was confident that someone would help him. Believing that he would once again be forgiven, Orihara shouted as loudly as he could that he was there and would be a victim if he wasn't rescued soon. Suddenly, the owner of the footsteps, a third person, appeared among them, carrying a scapula and pliers. Shiryuki smiled as this third person appeared. He was Inukai-sensei. With everything Orihara and his gang had done to Inukai-sensei, his teacher had finally built up a grudge. Now it was time for Inukai-sensei to take his revenge. With the scapula in his hand, Inukai-sensei said that to understand Orihara, Inukai-sensei would dissect him. Orihara could only be hysterical with fear. Shiryuki laughed again while expressing his surprise at Orihara's previous sweet attitude, hoping someone would come to his aid. No one would be willing to help a student who was so addicted to bullying or abusing others. Seeing Orihara's increasingly hysterical expression made Shiryuki smile broadly. Inukai-sensei was there, thinking about the best way to make Orihara feel what Inukai-sensei had felt from Orihara and his gang's abuse of the teacher. Orihara now realized he was truly on the brink of death. He immediately cried out for forgiveness from Inukai-sensei and Shiryuki. Shiryuki smiled broadly, holding a lily. The beautiful young man happily announced that the time had finally come for him to fulfill his promise to Haruki. One thing Orihara hadn't understood until then was that no matter how much the young man begged for forgiveness, the harassment he'd inflicted on him never went away. Shiryuki reassured Orihara, inserting the lily into his tongue through the previously pierced hole, that if Orihara had survived that day, everything would have been meaningless. Finally, Shiryuki clasped his hands together as if praying or expressing condolences at a funeral. The beautiful young man then said, "My condolences." With a lily stuck in her tongue, Orihara continued to beg for forgiveness from anyone. Shiryuki simply crouched down, looking at Orihara and smiling cheerfully. Even though Orihara pleaded for his life with great concern, no one moved to let him go. Shiryuki stood up, feeling so puzzled. Why were people who often committed violence and abuse always the pitiful figures who begged for forgiveness at the end? For Shiryuki, the pleas for forgiveness and forgiveness expressed at the end were something said when wanting to save oneself. But no matter how concerning the pleas were, they were not all sincere pleas. Shiryuki confirmed her words to Inukai-sensei, but the young teacher did not respond because he was focused on thinking about how to process Orihara. Inukai-sensei plans to proceed with the dissection, and he will use scissors. Inukai-sensei continues to mutter that he will cut on the side part just before the anus. Shiryuki then apologizes to Inukai-sensei for having made the young teacher wait so long. Now, Inukai-sensei is free to do whatever he wants to Orihara because Orihara is now only a name. The young man has died, just like the victims of a roller coaster that got stuck and sent visitors upside down in the air. Next day, Shiryuki met Haruki, who was in front of the grave of his former pet fish. Haruki had a bandaged wound on his face. Shiryuki, who was worried, then asked about the young man's condition. Shiryuki asked as if he didn't know anything. He wanted to know about Haruki, who had fainted in the storeroom and even been rushed to the hospital. Haruki laughed awkwardly and answered that he was fine. He just felt that Haruki had hit his jaw hard earlier, so now it still hurts a little. Shiryuki showed his feelings of curiosity towards Haruki. Haruki then suddenly asked back to confirm the truth of his memory. He wanted to know if Shiryuki was in the storeroom yesterday. Shiryuki was surprised and asked back why Haruki asked, and assumed that. Haruki then replied that he felt like he had seen Shiryuki enter the storeroom that day, but his memory was vague and not very clear. Shiryuki was silent for a moment before finally denying it. Shiryuki said that Haruki's memory was wrong. If Shiryuki had indeed come to the storeroom that day, then she would definitely have taken Haruki to the hospital. Hearing this explanation made Haruki accept the facts presented by Shiryuki. Haruki was now convinced that his memory was indeed wrong because he had previously fainted in the storeroom. Around them, several male and female students were excitedly discussing the latest news regarding Inukai-sensei. Many articles had been published reporting that their teacher, Inukai-sensei, had been arrested by the police for a surgical procedure performed on his own student. Hearing this news made Haruki wonder why his teacher would do such a cruel thing. Shiryuki only responded casually that what Inukai-sensei did was probably because the teacher felt resentment. She then became more interested in asking, even though it was a loss, just to make sure that his crush was happy when he learned of Orihara's death. Haruki felt at a loss for an answer to that question. Honestly, what mattered to him was that no one else was hurt, but that didn't rule out the fact that the disappearance of the characters who frequently abused students brought him quite a sense of relief. Haruki still felt empathy and sympathy for Orihara and the other two people who frequently abused him. Even though those three people were bullies, what happened to them was too cruel for Haruki. The atmosphere between them became a little gloomy because Shiryuki suddenly remembered that there was something he wanted to show Haruki. Shiryuki rushed Haruki to the biology room where they first met by chance. Haruki wondered what exactly Shiryuki wanted to show him. That curiosity then disappeared when they arrived in the biology room. The aquarium that had been empty some time ago was now filled again with several fish of the same species as before, namely disco fish. Shiryuki explained that the fish had just arrived that morning and that he knew Haruki would love them. He wanted him to care for them like before. Haruki accepted Shiryuki's gift and entrusted him with caring for the fish. A look of happiness crossed Haruki's face after a long time. Shiryuki felt relieved to see his expression brighten again. He then changed the subject and wanted to remind him of their promise. Shiryuki happily asked Haruki if he was going to go out with him like he promised, because there were no more bullies. Haruki was quite confused by Shiryuki's words. He asked if Shiryuki was really serious with that promise. Shiryuki replied that he was a person who was always serious, even though his expression always seemed to smile in front of Haruki. Haruki did not immediately obey and fulfill his promise, but the young man instead said that how could the situation to be so compatible between the disappearance of the bullies and their promise? Event after event happened so strangely, starting from Takaga's disappearance, Ryona's death due to suicide, and the Orihara case incident, which was dissected by Inukai-sensei, seemed to have a causality that he did not know. Hearing this reason made Shiryuki laugh. In his mind, Haruki wondered what made Shiryuki laugh, even though what he had just said did not contain any jokes. Suddenly, Shiryuki, with a smiling but serious facial expression, made Haruki a little wary. Shiryuki asked Haruki back about what Haruki actually wanted to say. The question indirectly made Haruki feel intimidated. Haruki began to suspect that the incident that befell the three people who had bullied him was something that had been done and planned by Shiryuki. However, if it was indeed done by Shiryuki, only so that the promise that Haruki promised to Shiryuki could be fulfilled, then Shiryuki's actions and Shiryuki herself could be abnormal. Haruki was sure that the situation was very abnormal. He recalled his vague memories when he was half-conscious in the storeroom. Was Shiryuki's presence in the storeroom gym that day really not a coincidence? Haruki thought hard about all the existing situations, but suddenly, Shiryuki took over his focus again. The two of them had a tense silence, but when everything was almost certain, Shiryuki threw a joke and said that he was just joking to surprise Haruki. Shiryuki denied Haruki's allegations and said that she could not possibly do such an impossible thing. Shiryuki told Haruki not to take her words seriously. Haruki then laughed after Shiryuki denied his allegations. With a disappointed face, Shiryuki asked if Haruki really believed that he had done something cruel to the bullies. Karaoke then apologized while laughing, but with a joking gesture. Shiryuki said that she did not accept Haruki's apology because she felt hurt by Haruki's suspicions. Shiryuki chuckled, saying he was hurt and not forgetting to remind Haruki that he hated seeing anyone hurt. Haruki fell into Shiryuki's trap. The young man then asked what he could do to make Shiryuki forgive him. Shiryuki pretended to be thinking about what he could do to atone for his mistake. The beautiful young man then said he wanted to go to Haruki's house. Haruki paused for a moment in surprise, while Shiryuki tried to persuade him to go to his house. Haruki felt that it was too soon for Shiryuki to go to his house. That didn't deter Shiryuki, as the young man asked again if the time could be postponed to tomorrow. A decision hadn't been made yet, but suddenly the school bell rang. Haruki used that opportunity to escape, pretending to rush to class so he wouldn't be late for his lesson. Shiryuki could only shout from behind, asking Haruki not to avoid the subject. Haruki was still walking quickly towards his class while Shiryuki, who was following him from behind, was still trying to make a deal with Haruki so that tomorrow he could go to Haruki's house. At the same time, the two students passed a female teacher. The teacher who passed Shiryuki felt something so refreshing, like a flower. Flowers have a short life period during which they bloom and bear fruit. Flowers have beauty and fragility. That's how the female teacher described the figure of a teenager who is also the same as a flower. She felt that Shiryuki, who passed by, had a charm similar to a flower. Not to be guarded, for the female teacher, Shiryuki's charm looked delicious to the point of making her want to eat it. Shiryuki was excited to be able to go to Haruki's house, while the female teacher was excited to mess with Shiryuki. A female teacher at the school where Shiryuki and Haruki were studying was preparing to teach. She looked in the mirror and adjusted her makeup while humming a few famous lines from the story of Snow White. The female teacher said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of them all?" she asked, but then answered herself that of course the most beautiful figure of all was herself. She was the most beautiful of them. However, behind her statement, her appearance was actually not that beautiful, coupled with her attitude like a disgusting predator. After feeling that her makeup was on point, the female teacher was ready to start her work. In class, Shiryuki looked very gloomy. Haruki tried to persuade Shiryuki not to be angry with him, but the beautiful young man complained to Haruki, who had previously promised to let him come to his house to play. Haruki didn't completely reject Shiryuki's visit to his house, but according to Haruki, it was too soon for Shiryuki to visit Haruki's house when they not really close. Honestly, for Haruki, it was okay for Shiryuki to come to his house, but only if the house was empty with his family members not at home. Haruki was sure that if Shiryuki suddenly came to his house when his parents were home, Haruki's parents would bombard Shiryuki with questions about how Haruki was at school. What worried Haruki was if Shiryuki started telling Haruki's parents about Haruki's school life. The worst possibility was that Haruki's parents would find out that their eldest son had been the target of abuse by several students, and that fact could later hurt his parents. Haruki didn't want his parents to know about Haruki's school life, especially when he was the victim. It was a fact he had to hide forever. However, Haruki couldn't bear to see Shiryuki constantly depressed because of his decision, so he decided to tell her that the beautiful young man could come to his house next week. Shiryuki, who had initially ignored Haruki, then turned around with a cheerful expression and a feeling of great joy. He held out her pinky finger and asked Haruki to keep his pro. "Missy this time." Haruki thought hard about whether Shiryuki might have thought that they were currently dating because, according to Haruki, their promise to be date together had not been fulfilled. After all, according to Haruki, it was not Shiryuki who had ended the abuse at their school. Besides, according to Haruki, the promise was also irrelevant because Shiryuki and he were both men. Therefore, he thought the promise he made would turn into a friendship rather than a couple. Haruki gave his little finger and then linked it with his thumb. That meant they had promised that Shiryuki would go to Haruki's house next week. The other students in the class were chatting amongst themselves, feeling the peace in their classroom now that the bullies were gone. They were grateful that with the three troublemakers gone, their school life could continue peacefully and happily. Now everyone could enjoy their youth freely. It was then that Haruki suddenly remembered that their physical education class was about to start. They hurriedly left to change into their gym uniforms. At the same time, in another room, a student named Kimura was being eaten out by a female teacher. One of the main reasons the female teacher pursued her profession was so she could admire and enjoy young flowers as much as she wanted. After the female teacher finished plucking Kimura's virginity, she immediately cleaned up her tracks and ordered him to hurry back to class because class was about to start. The female teacher felt that what she had done was starting to be in vain. The best age for a boy is between 16 and 17 years old. The body changes from a child to a young man in seconds. When they turn 18, from their muscles to their body hair and odor, everything transforms into a man. The female teacher peeked through the curtains and windows. Using binoculars, she saw Shiryuki in his gym class. Shiryuki was warming up and stretching. Seeing how lithe Shiryuki's body was made, the female teacher tempted him. Shiryuki looked like a doll. The beauty of the high schooler before Shiryuki hit puberty had increased her appetite in other ways. Shiryukiheim was a luxurious, high-class dish that she desperately wanted to consume every inch of. The passionate female teacher was named Fudo. The students often call her Fudo-sensei. Fudo-sensei teaches chemistry class. Even though her true nature is very disgusting, Fudo-sensei can teach very well. Many students find it very easy to understand what Fudo-sensei teaches. Fudo-sensei made this natural because up until now, she had always simply taught her students so that even stupid monkeys would definitely understand his knowledge. That day, Fudo-sensei also had a class that Shiryuki also attended. After explaining and assigning the students, Fudo-sensei's attention was immediately drawn to Shiryuki, who seemed focused on the book but lacked enthusiasm or high interest. Fudo-sensei covered part of her face with the book as she looked closely at Shiryuki. She realized that Shiryuki had very long and curly eyelashes. That made Fudo-sensei's lust increase. She wanted to see Shiryuki's eyelashes shaking uncontrollably in pleasure. Confusion, shame, and pleasure mixed with something sticky. Fudo-sensei wanted Shiryuki to look at her with tears in his eyes. Fudo-sensei really looked forward to the day and the moment when she could realize what was in her mind about Shiryuki. Class was over. Shiryuki was asked by Fudo-sensei to help her return some chemicals to their original shelves. Fudo-sensei thanked Shiryuki for his willingness to help clean up. Shiryuki then replied that he would really appreciate his teacher if he could return to class immediately. In his mind, Shiryuki wanted to see Haruki immediately. The expression on Haruki's face was something Shiryuki couldn't stand. Fudo-sensei made small talk with Shiryuki to keep him trapped there longer. She brought up the topic of conversation, explaining that she had previously heard about Shiryuki always getting perfect scores on exams and coming from a prestigious school before transferring there. Fudo-sensei pretended to ask because she wanted to know what kind of classes were in Shiryuki's old school. Fudo-sensei was pleased to learn that Shiryuki was an intelligent student. Shiryuki didn't care about the various things Fudo-sensei said. He simply asked to confirm whether the shelf where the chemicals were stored was unlocked. Fudo-sensei answered as she rose from her chair. On the shelf were several toxic substances, like hydrochloric acid or sulfuric acid. They should be on a locked shelf for the safety of the students. Fudo-sensei moved closer to Shiryuki while explaining the chemicals on the shelf. Fudo-sensei pressed her body against Shiryuki. One hand began to feel Shiryuki's front body, while the other hand pointed towards the chemical substance. Fudo-sensei's lips were near Shiryuki's ear, speaking tea. He names of the chemical substances while breathing on the beautiful young man. Fudo-sensei also explained that some chemicals are dangerous depending on how they are handled. Then suddenly, when Shiryuki had been silent all this time, the young man asked in a flat tone why Fudo-sensei touched him carelessly. Fudo-sensei was still unaware that her actions had been noticed. She was even happier when she saw Shiryuki, who looked cute in her eyes, when Shiryuki was stiff like that. Fudo-sensei almost licked and devoured Shiryuki's ears, which she thought looked delicious. But before that disgusting thing happened, Shiryuki turned to the side with an embarrassed expression, and then asked what exactly her chemistry teacher was doing to him. Fudo-sensei was shocked when she was almost caught red-handed. The woman was confused when she had to answer Shiryuki's sudden question. Shiryuki again told Fudo-sensei honestly that the sound of Fudo-sensei's breath in his ears sounded very disgusting. He even said that he thought there was a pig that had escaped from its pen around them. Fudo-sensei was very shocked when she was compared to a pig. Shiryuki took a chemical substance from a jar and went back to class. Fudo-sensei didn't realize the chemical was missing. She was more surprised by Shiryuki's attitude and behavior. Despite being caught red-handed by Shiryuki, Fudo-sensei dismisses it as Shiryuki's stupidity. Fudo-sensei thought she had just scared Shiryuki. A few days later, in Fudo-sensei's chemistry class, just before class ended, Fudo-sensei was about to announce her students. Her students were then very enthusiastic about the announcement that their teacher would make. Fudo-sensei said that some time ago, she had given some chemistry problems for them to solve. Fudo-sensei honestly made it the Japan National High School Chemistry Competition. There was one student who managed to win the competition, and that student was Yuki. All the students cheered and celebrated Yuki's success, except Yuki himself. Fudo-sensei handed over the medals and trophies that Yuki was supposed to receive, but instead of a happy twinkle in his eye, Yuki gave Fudo-sensei a sharp, intimidating stare. The woman noticed this. Fudo-sensei was disappointed with Yuki's reaction. According to her, Yuki was no longer useful to her, even though he had the looks, charm, and great willpower. Fudo-sensei was already convinced that she had to give up on Yuki. However, Fudo-sensei then saw Haruki approaching Yuki with a proud expression. Haruki praised Yuki's achievements. When Haruki arrived, Yuki's expression also changed in an instant to a cheerful one. Yuki noticed that Haruki had changed lately. He seemed more energetic lately. He suspected it might be because the abuse had gone. Then there wouldn't be anything else bothering them. That was what Yuki thought. However, his expression was noticed by Fudo-sensei. The woman was amazed to see the two of them smile. Her appetite for the young leaves was revived. Break time has arrived. Yuki felt very happy when Haruki praised him. His praise made Yuki grateful because he was good at chemistry. He thought maybe Haruki would be happy if Yuki taught him about what Yuki had mastered during their date. His thoughts stopped for a moment. He didn't see Haruki when break time was almost over. Haruki said goodbye to Yuki that there was something Haruki had to do, but Yuki didn't know where Haruki went. The young man thought maybe they wouldn't be able to have lunch together that day. At the same time, in the chemistry practice room, Haruki was meeting with Fudo-sensei. The young man had previously apologized to Fudo-sensei for disturbing her during break time. Haruki had some questions that he couldn't answer, so he wanted to ask Fudo-sensei. Fudo-sensei didn't mind Haruki's request. Haruki really admired Yuki's ability to study chemistry because he was very bad at that subject. Haruki began to think about asking Yuki to teach him in the future. While Haruki was enthusiastic, Fudo-sensei had indecent thoughts about Haruki. He felt the young man looked adorable when observed up close. If he had known Haruki would be so adorable, Fudo-sensei felt a little disappointed for not protecting his prey from the start. Fudo-sensei had known about the acts of abuse and harassment that befell Haruki. Fudo-sensei also realized that even though Haruki had gone through something very terrible, the young man remained silent and did not report it to anyone. With this suspicion, Fudo-sensei felt that Haruki would be able to become his obedient prey. Fudo-sensei spoke to Haruki and said that Haruki just had to try harder. Fudo-sensei then said that Haruki's glasses looked dirty. She lent Haruki her handkerchief to clean the dust on his glasses. When Haruki took off his glasses to wipe them with Fudo-sensei's handkerchief, the woman could clearly see Haruki's face without his glasses. Haruki's face looked adorable and received an 85 point from Fudo-sensei. After finishing wiping the dust off his glasses, Haruki returned the handkerchief to its owner, Fudo-sensei. Fudo-sensei asked if she could ask for compensation from Haruki. Haruki, who felt indebted to Fudo-sensei, then agreed. He would help Fudo-sensei with whatever he could do. In class, Yuki ate alone. He was getting bored waiting for Haruki, who was late even when lunchtime was almost over and Yuki's food was almost finished. At the same time, it wasn't that Haruki didn't want to go back to class and eat, but in the chemistry room, he was the one being eaten. A jar of liquid chemicals was seen lying there, spilling its contents. Some of Haruki's clothes and pants were wet. He lay on the table while Fudo-sensei was almost perfectly on top of the young man, slowly, one by one, unbuttoning Haruki's shirt, buckle, and pants. Yuki waited in class, his enthusiasm returning when he saw Haruki return. However, Haruki returned in his gym uniform, his expression grim. Yuki realized something must have happened, but when he asked him what was wrong, he replied listlessly that nothing was wrong. Haruki took out his bento and said he hadn't eaten yet, so he would eat soon. He asked if he had been waiting for him to eat with him. Haruki apologized for not being able to eat with him that day. Yuki paused, then replied that it was okay. Shiryuki was stunned when Haruki said, "Sorry." He thought perhaps he was eager to eat with him. Usually when Shiryuki invited him to eat with him, Haruki always looked embarrassed. Haruki ate silently. He seemed unable to enjoy his meal. His gaze was blank, as if something had happened that had made him lose his appetite and his sense of enjoyment. He remembered, while in the chemistry lab, he offered what he could to help Fudo-sensei. Fudo-sensei asked Haruki to leave the dehydrator and help her put the chemicals on the shelf. Haruki did as Fudo-sensei asked, even asking to make sure the place was right or wrong first. Fudo-sensei stood up and approached Haruki, pretending to ask the young man to turn around so she could see and make sure the chemicals were correct. Haruki accidentally let go of what he was holding. The bottle labeled sodium hydroxide spilled onto his clothes. Haruki wanted to handle his wet clothes, but Fudo-sensei stopped him. She said that the liquid was a dangerous substance. If Haruki left it alone, his skin would start to ulcerate. Fudo-sensei recklessly forced Haruki to take off his outer coat. Haruki was shocked, but Fudo-sensei was lying. Previously, Fudo-sensei had replaced the contents of the sodium hydroxide bottle with water. Haruki wanted to take care of himself, but Fudo-sensei kept clinging to him and forced him to undress. Haruki still wanted to take care of himself, but Fudo-sensei, with a very disgusting facial expression, said that it would be very dangerous for students to touch the chemical liquid. Haruki was forced to take off all his clothes before everything became a disaster. Fudo-sensei would replace Haruki's uniform with a sports uniform. The shirt that was already unbuttoned allowed the woman's hands to freely feel Haruki's body and skin directly. Her lust was really visible through Fudo-sensei's uncontrolled facial expression, very disgusting with her tongue constantly sticking out. Fudo-sensei brought her face closer to Haruki's body to get a better look. Her excuse was to examine him, but it was actually just for fun. His shirt, which was originally neat, was now torn and looked messy. Fudo-sensei could clearly see Haruki's upper body. The appearance of a pubescent teenager with his still smooth chest and stomach was something delicious in the eyes of that crazy woman. With her handkerchief, Fudo-sensei rubbed Haruki's body. The friction in several sensitive areas made Haruki display the expression Fudo-sensei so desired. Haruki tried to hold back as much as possible. Haruki gasped slightly. Seeing Haruki's expression made Fudo-sensei lose control even more, and he wanted to immediately suck all over Haruki's youthful body. Without permission, Fudo-sensei began to undo Haruki's belt. The young man realized and was shocked. He tried to refuse and said he would do it himself. Fudo-sensei was reluctant to let go of her prey. She alleged that it might not hurt now, but it is still dangerous. The woman pretended to be worried that it would leave scars on Haruki, so she emphasized that Haruki only needed to lie down on the table. Haruki was honestly reluctant, not willing to have his sensitive part watched by his chemistry teacher, but he couldn't refuse. Fudo-sensei was getting worse. Seeing Haruki's expression made her even more unable to hold back. Haruki tried his best to scream for Fudo-sensei to stop, but was shocked to hear his teacher's words after his refusal. Fudo-sensei said to make sure Haruki was good at keeping quiet about those kinds of things. With a disgusting, lustful face, the woman said that she knew Haruki had been the target of bullying all this time. Haruki was speechless. Fudo-sensei threw a threat disguised as praise that Haruki was an extraordinary person and would find it very uncomfortable if other teachers found out what they were doing. With this threat, Haruki had lost all hope. He could no longer act. Fudo-sensei promised Haruki that if Haruki was good, she would reveal his chemistry score. That way, Haruki would be recommended to a good school. However, if Haruki behaved badly, Fudo-sensei threatened to spread Haruki's situation to the whole world. Among the jars and bottles of chemical liquid, Fudo-sensei placed a camera to record them. Not stopping there, Fudo-sensei again threatened Haruki that if he behaved badly, Fudo-sensei would target Shiryuki. The threat immediately stunned Haruki. He felt he should not let his teacher hurt Shiryuki. Haruki felt depressed and down because he had only felt pleasure recently for a short time. He no longer experienced bullying and began to make friends. But unfortunately, the world he lived in was full of monsters. Therefore, he concluded that someone had to be punished. Haruki was no longer rebellious. He surrendered even though his body began to be colonized by the figure of his chemistry teacher, who was very disgusting in her behavior. While Haruki was in so much pain and unable to do anything, Fudoi-sensei began to savor her sweet treat. The smell of pure fabric conditioner, with a hint of the teenager's sour odor, was palpable. A beautiful stomach without a single strand of body hair, Haruki now earned a 95 point for his body. Fudoi-sensei could no longer hold back. The woman began licking Haruki. Fudoi-sensei felt she understood teenage students very well. Young boys tended to be very passionate about adult things, so all they needed to do was fall into this sea of pleasure once and submit themselves fully. She thought they would definitely hate it at first, but if they were threatened, they wouldn't be able to go back on their word. That was what Fudoi-sensei had believed all along, but she hadn't even noticed that Haruki wasn't enjoying the service at all. Back to Shiryuki. The young man seemed so happy to see Haruki, who was eating silently. He admired Haruki, who looked so cute in his eyes. Shiryuki then realized and felt confused why Haruki changed his uniform to a sports uniform. The girls in his class were curious why Haruki had just eaten his bento even though class was about to start. Haruki replied that he could only return to class and eat his lunch because Fudoi-sensei had something to do with him beforehand. Hearing that answer made Shiryuki surprised and suspicious of something. The girls laughed while wondering what help Fudoi-sensei asked from Haruki. They even realized that Fudoi-sensei only relies on boys to help her with things. Haruki could only laugh awkwardly, unable to answer the girls. Shiryuki grabbed Haruki and led him to the toilet. Shiryuki didn't hear him ask where they were going and that they would be late for class if they left now. In the toilet, Shiryuki confronted Haruki and asked him to tell the truth. What exactly had Fudoi-sensei done to Haruki? Shiryuki wanted to know the truth. Haruki was stunned for a moment. The situation became awkward for Haruki. He then explained what happened to his clothes. Haruki said that he was careless and spilled a bottle of chemicals. Haruki then changed his clothes because they were wet from the spilled chemical liquid. Shiryuki was stunned and couldn't believe it. Haruki then said that the chemical liquid that wet him at that time, if he's not mistaken, was sodium hydroxide. Hearing the name of the chemical solution made Shiryuki rush to ask Haruki to show the traces. Shiryuki looked at Haruki's body to examine it, but there were no traces of ulcers or burns. Haruki said that he was fine. He even apologized for making Shiryuki worry. Haruki trembled. His expression looked very uncomfortable. Shiryuki wanted to ask, but Haruki said that no one had done anything strange to him. In fact, Shiryuki was the one acting strange. Haruki left and asked Shiryuki to come back soon so they wouldn't miss class. Shiryuki remained silent, frozen behind him. Her expression returned to seriousness. He wanted to know what had really happened to Haruki. Shiryuki began to suspect that Fudoi-sensei had done something suspicious to Haruki. In the chemistry room, Fudoi-sensei was enjoying her time by looking at photos and videos of the flowers she had eaten and collected on her phone. Her relaxing time was interrupted by someone knocking on the door, looking for Fudoi-sensei. At the door was Shiryuki, sweating, hot, and complaining that he felt feverish. Shiryuki also modified his expression to suit Fudoi-sensei's taste. Of course, seeing the flower she had initially been unable to pick come to her by itself made the woman ambitious again. She immediately invited Shiryuki to come in. Fudoi-sensei asked Shiryuki if he should go to the infirmary first. Shiryuki replied that it seemed the people in charge were away. Fudoi-sensei's heart grew brighter, feeling that her time had come. She pretended to grab a thermometer to check Shiryuki's temperature. When the woman turned around, unsuspecting, Shiryuki threw a microscope at her head, knocking Fudoi-sensei unconscious. When she came to, she was in a strange place and her clothes were partially missing. Around her, Fudoi-sensei saw several pigs in their pens. She didn't realize that Shiryuki was there, sitting behind a log behind Fudoi-sensei. The woman didn't realize until Shiryuki took a picture of the confused Fudoi-sensei and complimented her pose. Fudoi-sensei also had her hands tied behind her back. Only her feet were left free. With a wide smile and her phone ready for the camera, Shiryuki prepared to broadcast the female pigs mate fight all over the world. The phone Shiryuki was holding at that time belonged to Fudoi-sensei. The woman was a little relieved because her phone was locked, but Shiryuki was able to guess the passcode and easily unlock the phone. Shiryuki saw that Fudoi-sensei had used many similar tricks to deceive other students. Shiryuki was curious to know how many students had fallen victim to the woman. Fudoi-sensei denied what Shiryuki had said. She said she hadn't done anything. Shiryuki guessed that the woman had lied to the students by saying the water was sodium hydroxide. knew that sodium hydroxide was a dangerous substance. Sensei also knew how dangerous it was, being a chemistry teacher. Yuki wanted Sensei to experience firsthand how dangerous the liquid was. She then poured a bottle directly onto the woman's head. Sensei was so scared that she screamed hysterically and writhed, but nothing happened. Yuki lied just like Sensei. The bottle was just water. Sensei was quite scared, asking what Yuki would do to her. The woman still had the nerve to threaten Yuki that she would report to the police about what the beautiful young man did to her. Yuki laughed. How could he let his target do something boring like that? Sensei started asking what Yuki wanted because if it was money, then the woman could give as much as she wanted. Yuki laughed a little because he was misunderstood. He didn't want anything, he just really hated Sensei. Yuki asked Sensei to look behind her. There were several male pigs in the pen. Sensei was especially afraid of what Yuki might do to him with those pigs. Yuki briefly explained the fact that pig semen was 30 times more effective than human semen. Another fact was that when the birth season was underway, the male pig's desires also increased sharply. Yuki released a large male pig from the pen. The pig immediately approached Sensei, attempting to mate with her. The pig started sniffing Sensei's feet. The woman lay face down, hoping to escape with that position, but unfortunately the pig got access to the woman's backside. Sensei shouted for Yuki not to do that to her. She couldn't do it with a pig because it would be too disgusting. However, Yuki asked in surprise, why couldn't Sensei do it? According to Yuki, what was happening right now should be very good for Sensei. Because in the eyes of the pigs, there was no one more beautiful than Sensei. Yuki was still standing by with Sensei's phone and recording. He said that round 2 of the pigs' mating battle was about to begin. Sensei could only shout angrily at Yuki and at the pig who was lusting after her. Sensei saw the door slightly open. The woman quickly got up, jumped, and tried to escape. She thought Yuki would just stay still, but in fact the young man took out a roll of string with the end attached to a modified belt head like a fishing hook. Yuki threw it, and it landed right in Sensei's nasal cavity. Yuki asked why his teacher was running away. Sensei asked him to stop, but Yuki was sure stop was said only for Sensei's own benefit. He then wondered if the woman stopped when Haruki asked her to. Yuki happily said that Haruki had seemed very happy lately. He even saw that Haruki had started smiling more often. This started to happen when the bullying had disappeared. Yuki also said that Haruki had promised him to date Yuki as well. However, Yuki suddenly realized that a certain pig had become another obstacle. With a serious and disgusted expression, Yuki earnestly asked, "Do you dare to touch Haruki?" Sensei couldn't focus. Her nose aching and her backside constantly being touched by the pig's tongue. Seeing how the pig seemed so attentive to Sensei made Yuki smile happily. Yuki still let Sensei feel tortured by the male pigs there. The woman begged Yuki to stop and promised to grant and do whatever Yuki asked. Yuki replied that Sensei should just enjoy her time with the piggies. Suddenly, Yuki remembered that Sensei really liked young people, so he brought a male piglet too. Sensei screamed for her student to stop showing the pigs. Yuki was confused. What should he do if not that? Sensei tried to get Yuki to stop. She explained what would happen to the young man if he continued his behavior. Yuki would be arrested and wouldn't be able to go to school anymore. If that were the case, Yuki also felt he would be sad if he couldn't see Haruki. Sensei said that she wouldn't report Yuki if he stopped right then. Sensei even offered Yuki a unique experience if he wanted, but the offer only made Yuki feel even more disgusted with his chemistry teacher. Yuki says that Sensei should feel what Haruki felt when the pigs tortured her. Yuki pulls the string but then releases his grip. As a result, Sensei falls to the ground, and the male boars immediately swarm her for their share. Yuki leaves Sensei with the pigs, avoiding interrupting their romantic scene. Sometime later, when Sensei was finished, she crawled out. She kept muttering that she would never forgive him for what he had done to her that day, but Yuki was waiting by the door. Yuki's ordeal wasn't over yet. With a dog collar, the beautiful young man put it tightly around Sensei's neck. Yuki pulled and dragged Sensei to a nearby abandoned cabin. There, he felt he could leave Fudo-sensei safely. There, Fudo-sensei could play with many other animals. According to Shiryuki, this could be a fun experience for Fudo-sensei. A few days later, rumors and gossip circulated about Fudo-sensei. The chemistry teacher suddenly disappeared without a trace. Rumors circulated that Fudo-sensei had molested several students. The video had even been circulated to the Board of Education. Hearing this made Haruki furious. Suddenly, Shiryuki appeared and greeted Haruki. Haruki returned his greeting and then asked if Fudo-sensei had done something to Shiryuki. Shiryuki asked again what kind of thing the woman could have done to him. Haruki didn't answer. He only said that a few strange rumors were circulating. But if Shiryuki hadn't experienced anything, Haruki was quite grateful to hear it. Shiryuki showed a confused expression at what Haruki had just said to him. Haruki just smiled and said that he thought it would be bad if something happened to Shiryuki. Hearing those words made Shiryuki even more amazed by Haruki. In Shiryuki's view, Haruki was someone who, despite having experienced bad things, still worried about others more than himself. Shiryuki then suddenly remembered the pinky promise they both made. The beautiful young man today again asked Haruki to let him go to Haruki's house to play. Finally, what Shiryuki wanted came true. That day, the two of them went home together to Haruki's house. As the host, Haruki asked Shiryuki to wait in his room while Haruki went down to the kitchen to bring water and snacks. When he returned to his room, he was confused as to why Shiryuki suddenly wore glasses. Shiryuki cheerfully replied that he just wanted to look like Haruki. Haruki asked to make sure that Shiryuki's eyesight was not bad and was fine. He then said that Shiryuki looked better without glasses. Hearing this, Shiryuki immediately took off his glasses. The two of them were in their room. Shiryuki was enthusiastic about telling a story, while Haruki was anxious about his parents' arrival at a critical time. Shiryuki realized that Haruki was distracted. Shiryuki even made Haruki unable to deny that he hadn't been listening to his story before. The young man then wanted to refill their drinks in the kitchen, but this time, Shiryuki chose to come downstairs. While downstairs, a girl had just come home from school. The girl was Haruki's younger sister. Haruki introduces Shiryuki to his sister as his classmate, but Shiryuki seems dissatisfied when Haruki refers to him only as a classmate. Haruki's sister seems indifferent to Haruki, but honestly, she also cares about Shiryuki as a friend. Haruki and Shiryuki return to the room. Shiryuki then looks at Haruki's photo album from when he was little. Shiryuki just found out that Haruki has a younger sister. Shiryuki now feels even more curious about Haruki. Akari, Haruki's younger sister, seemed curious about her brother's friend. Shiryuki's seemingly kind and good-looking figure made Akari realize that Shiryuki would definitely succeed in Hai's life, but what confused her was how someone like Shiryuki could be close to her brother. The girl sneaked around to observe her brother's interaction with Shiryuki to get a clearer picture. At that time, Haruki was explaining the photos that Shiryuki had pointed to. The album they were looking at was an album containing Haruki's childhood photos. Haruki happily explained that the photo showing him and Akari as children was proof that the siblings were very close. At that time, wherever Haruki went, Akari would follow him. Haruki realized that his closeness with his sister was not like before, but even so, Akari was still an adorable little sister whom he loved very much. Because the girl was a beloved member of his family, Haruki wanted Shiryuki to be able to have a good relationship with her. Shiryuki agreed to Haruki's request. As long as the person was an important figure for Haruki, Shiryuki would guarantee that he would also appreciate them. Akari was still watching the interaction between the two young men from behind the door, but the girl felt something strange between them. Suddenly, the interaction she saw made her even more confused. Suddenly, Haruki cried without knowing why. Seeing this incident made everyone amazed. Haruki felt like he couldn't stop his own tears. He suspected that the outburst of his feelings was because it had been so long since he last had a long conversation with a friend. Haruki felt grateful and very thankful to Shiryuki for wanting to be good friends with him. Shiryuki was certainly very happy with what he had just said. Suddenly, Shiryuki leaned his face very close to Haruki's face. This incident made Akari and Haruki very surprised. Shiryuki did that because he saw a strand of hair on Haruki's shoulder, while Akari outside had already assumed that the two people she was monitoring were kissing. But after hearing Shiryuki say that it was just a strand of hair, Akari was relieved for a moment. Shiryuki invited Haruki to go out for a walk. When Haruki got ready, Shiryuki put the strand of hair in his pocket. Akari, who was initially calm, suddenly panicked again. While Akari was still confused, Shiryuki suddenly looked at her. The next day at school, Shiryuki waited for Haruki, who was on duty putting up posters. Haruki had asked Shiryuki to go home first, but the beautiful young man preferred to go home with Haruki. At the same time, Akari was sneaking into her brother's school wearing a sports uniform. She infiltrated because she felt something was wrong with Shiryuki. Akari arrived in front of Haruki's class. The girl saw her brother helping a girl whose finger had been cut by paper. Haruki put a band-aid on the girl's finger. Shiryuki looked shocked seeing Haruki's actions. The girls saw Haruki's awkward behavior and began to think that Haruki was really adorable. Haruki felt embarrassed. He acted immediately to treat the girl and carried a band-aid everywhere because of his sister. Haruki then excused himself to get more glue. The girls began to think Haruki was very adorable. They even asked Shiryuki's opinion. Instead of responding, Shiryuki said that he could help Haruki himself, so the girls could go home first. The girls were initially hesitant, but because Shiryuki insisted, they hurried home. When Shiryuki was alone, the beautiful young man took out a cutter and cut his finger until it bled. Akari was shocked and felt the need to record it to show Haruki. However, in her panic, Akari dropped her phone, making Shiryuki realize there was someone else besides him. Akari rushed to run away in fear. The girl immediately labeled Shiryuki dangerous. Shiryuki had already reached for the door and opened it. Akari accidentally bumped into her older brother. She felt a little relieved to see Haruki there. Haruki was shocked. What exactly was his little sister doing at his school? Before she could answer, Shiryuki came over to greet Akari, revealing his bleeding finger. Haruki panicked when he saw Shiryuki injured. Shiryuki said he accidentally cut himself while helping put up the poster. Akari was shocked again by Shiryuki's untrue words. Haruki didn't suspect anything. He simply did the same thing he did to the girls before, put a bandage on Shiryuki's finger. Akari was increasingly convinced that Shiryuki was truly strange. She wanted to tell Haruki immediately that Shiryuki was a dangerous man.
Haruki arrived home and was greeted by Akari's worried questions. Where did her brother come from? Because according to his routine, Haruki came home a little late this time. Haruki answered his sister's question that the reason for being late was that he was on duty putting up posters. Akari should have known because she had seen it. Now, Haruki asked back why his sister went to school that day. Akari didn't answer, but took her brother to his room. When they arrived, Akari lectured him again. How could her brother be so careless? How could her brother not know Shiryuki? Haruki could only be confused. Akari shouted, emphatically stating that Shiryuki was a psychopath. Haruki was silent for a moment. After a moment, he felt that what Akari was arguing about was not something they should be arguing about. Haruki wanted to know why Akari could think that Shiryuki was a psychopath. Akari was very annoyed and frustrated that her brother could not realize the fact. Akari then recounted an incident when she came to her brother's school. While Akari was waiting for her brother to return, she saw Shiryuki sitting in his seat in the classroom. Hearing half of Akari's explanation made Haruki assume that his little sister might be interested in Shiryuki. Hearing her brother's response made Akari even more annoyed. She asked what her brother thought about Shiryuki being in class alone. Haruki couldn't guess, so he asked Akari again, and the answer was that Shiryuki had cut his own finger. Haruki wasn't surprised. He also knew that Shiryuki had accidentally cut his finger on a poster sheet by accident. Akari denied that it was an accident. For her, Shiryuki had cut his finger on purpose. Haruki doesn't quite understand Akari's explanation. Why did Shiryuki have to intentionally hurt himself? Akari explains that it was done by Shiryuki so that Haruki would treat Shiryuki's wounds. Haruki still doesn't understand the point of his conversation with Akari until Akari explains directly that a popular handsome boy like Shiryuki would spend time with her gloomy brother. Akari is sure Shiryuki has skewed a weird plan against Haruki. Akari makes it clear that Shiryuki is definitely a bad person. Haruki should stay away from Shiryuki and not get involved with him. Haruki fell silent. His expression turned to one of disgust at Akari. He commented dryly that if he had known what Akari was going to say from the start, he shouldn't have cared so much. Haruki then explained that Shiryuki was a transfer student. Before Shiryuki arrived, Haruki was alone at school, but after Shiryuki arrived at his school, and became his classmate, Haruki's school life began to become more enjoyable. He didn't care if Akari laughed at him or anything, but he warned Akari that even though she was his little sister, he wouldn't allow Akari to say bad things about Shirayuki. Akari was angry. Of course, after everything she had done for Haruki, everything was because she was so worried and cared about her brother. She was disappointed that even though she cared that much, her brother didn't follow her request. When Akari was about to scream because she had reached the peak of her anger, she saw Shirayuki's figure behind the window. The girl immediately opened the window to check, but found nothing. Haruki was confused and asked what was wrong. Akari said that Shirayuki was watching them both. Haruki also looked, and Akari became even more annoyed. She didn't want her brother to be friends with a strange person like Shirayuki. Haruki acted firmly, warning Akari not to be rude. An annoyed Akari left her brother alone. Outside, on the roof of Haruki's house, Shirayuki sat enjoying ice cream while wondering what Haruki and his sister were arguing about. Whatever it was, Shirayuki was still happy and amazed to see Haruki's behavior, which was new to him. That was Haruki when he was angry. Not long after, Akari went out to hang out with some of her friends. She explained that she was late meeting them because she had just fought with her sister. She still didn't know where they were going to hang out this time. Her friends just laughed and took Akari to the place they had planned. They arrived at a room marked private reservation. Not only Akari and her friends, but several men were already waiting for them. There, her friends honestly told her that their hangout was a group date with 3 university students. According to Akari's friends, Akari should relax and have some fun. Her friends were enthusiastic, while Akari wasn't so keen on the idea. There was no way Akari would go home when she arrived. As a result, she could only join in, though she seemed unenthusiastic. Not only her friends, but the men from the university could also see that Akari continued to be gloomy even though they were surrounded by them. Her friends said that Akari had just fought with her older brother. An upset Akari accidentally said that she was fed up with her brother's treatment, who continued to treat her like a little girl. The men from the university felt concerned. To relieve Akari's sadness, they offered Akari a drink. At first, Akari was reluctant to drink alcohol, but because they insisted that the alcohol was low, Akari could only give in. Akari's determination was further strengthened when the man said that it was also for Akari, so that she would no longer be treated like a little girl. Akari drank a glass of the alcoholic cocktail and soon lost consciousness. Akari and her 2 unconscious friends began to be worked on by the men from the university. Akari woke up slightly and surprised the man who tried to undress her. The young man was a little surprised by how Akari could wake up so quickly because the pills he put in the girl's drinks should have had quite a strong effect. Even though Akari was conscious, she still couldn't move freely and remained weak. The young man was at the peak of pleasure. He told Akari that he would help Akari become an adult soon and leave her status as a girl. The young man wanted to take Akari's virginity. Akari could only whisper a request for help from her brother as her floral panties slipped from their places. The young men simply laughed. No one would come to save the young woman. Suddenly, one of the 3 men was beaten by Shirayuki. They were shocked, as was Akari. How could Shirayuki have entered without them noticing? Shirayuki took some drinks in glasses and poured them for the women to wake them up. He also beat the men. Akari was very surprised by the situation. Shirayuki could beat the men in an instant. One of the men then suspected that Shirayuki was Akari's older brother, but that assumption was certainly not true. Shirayuki came because the men were going to do something that could hurt the feelings of someone very important to Shirayuki. The young man denied it. He said that they were just drinking and having a good time, especially Akari, who wanted to relax, so they would do so. Shirayuki also agreed with the idea. Therefore, Shirayuki wanted to join in and enjoy the drink. He asked the young men if they knew what happens if they introduce alcohol into their anus. When absorbed directly through the rectal mucosa, blood alcohol concentration rises rapidly. The guard trembled as he tried to flee upon hearing Shirayuki's plan. To prevent his target from escaping, Shirayuki blocked him with a kick. Shirayuki did what he had just told him. When she had calmed down a bit, Akari, who had regained consciousness, asked why Shirayuki was there. Shirayuki said that he was quite worried about Akari. He didn't want to worry her because he came. Akari was stunned and blushed. Akari thought maybe Shirayuki was interested in her, but all that came out of Shirayuki's mouth was Haruki's name. Shirayuki then left when the situation had completely calmed down. leaving Akari and her friends and the guys from the university unconscious with liquor bottles stuck in their backs. Akari got up, confused because she had lost something. A few days later, Shirayuki came to Haruki's house again. Akari, without her brother's notice, called Shirayuki to meet her. Because of that, Shirayuki excused himself to use the toilet. Akari called Shirayuki to thank her for his help. Shirayuki felt disturbed in his mind because his time with Haruki had to be interrupted because of Akari. Akari was also there and wanted to give compensation money to Shirayuki, even though the young man actually felt it was unnecessary. Haruki suddenly came out of his room and saw Shirayuki and Akari seeming to be talking. Haruki wanted to know what happened. Shirayuki felt his day was quite bad. He was about to take something floral out of his pocket. Seeing that made Akari panic and think it was her underwear, but it turned out to be Shirayuki's handkerchief. Akari felt very threatened. She knew Shirayuki was doing it on purpose. The young man whispered to Akari and asked if the girl thought he had the original. Before she could answer, Shirayuki asked Akari to keep it a secret between the two of them. Akari suddenly felt her heart beating fast. She felt like she would never be attracted to a strange person like Shirayuki. Haruki himself was confused about when Shirayuki and Akari became so close. Haruki then changed the topic and invited Shirayuki to go to the cinema together one day because there was a movie Haruki wanted to watch with Shirayuki. Of course, Shirayuki responded very happily. Until then, Akari was still confused about why Shirayuki could like her brother. Shirayuki, who at that time felt very happy, did not expect that Haruki could also keep his distance from him. One morning, Akari, who was on her way to school, felt so annoyed by her older brother's siscon attitude. Haruki seemed to be trying to follow his sister, who was walking ahead. Suddenly, Shirayuki appeared and greeted them both. Akari went to school with Haruki and Shirayuki, even though the girl went to a different school. Akari went to an all-girls school close to her brother's school. Shirayuki asked if there was anything Shirayuki had said that had accidentally worried Akari. Akari stammered and answered that nothing was wrong. There's a case at Akari's school that worries Haruki and their mother excessively. The case concerns a missing girl. Shirayuki wants to know the details. Akari explains that the missing girl was a girl who wanted to look cool and ran off with some guy. Hearing this, Shirayuki asks to make sure Akari won't go out with just any guy. Akari is sure she wouldn't do that either. Her family is just worrying too much. Haruki saw everything. It was the first time he'd seen Akari so close to a guy and interacting so intimately. Conversely, when he saw Shirayuki, he realized that Shirayuki was a cool guy admired by many girls, but rarely interacted with the girls who pursued him. Haruki thought maybe his sister and Shirayuki were a good match. They parted ways due to their different school goals. Classes went on as usual until finally it was time to go home. For Haruki, that day was his duty schedule. He knew it was his responsibility to clean up, but that day he felt heavy because he was worried about Akari and wanted to see her home safely. Fortunately, Haruki was able to calm down. Shirayuki said that Haruki could entrust Akari's safety to him. For that, Haruki was very grateful, although he was also sure that along the way, Akari and Shirayuki would argue a lot. As Haruki finished taking out the trash, he heard a commotion. Two students had accidentally broken a flower pot, one of the janitor's favorite flowers. They were afraid, believing they would be scolded. Haruki was there, coming to them and calming them down. Haruki gladly took over their mistake. Although uncomfortable, the students were very grateful to Haruki. As a result, Haruki was the one scolded by the janitors. He was then ordered to fix his mistake. Haruki was quite confused. He honestly didn't know how to fix the plant pot and the plant. While he was still confused, someone came to offer help. A young man said that he cared for a rose plant at home, so he was sure he could help Haruki. Haruki was speechless because it felt like this was the first time he had seen such a prince-like figure at the same school as him. The young man then stepped in and showed Haruki how to fix the plant. It wasn't long before they finished fixing it. The handsome young man said that he had witnessed everything from the beginning. The handsome young man could judge that Haruki was a very kind young man. The reason why Haruki was responsible was that he knew the janitor's lecture would last quite a long time. Haruki felt bad if the children were punished. Haruki felt better if he was the one being scolded. Haruki's statement attracted the handsome young man to him. The handsome man then introduced himself as Yukagami, a third-year student and Haruki's senior. Haruki also introduced himself. The two shook hands, and for some reason, Haruki ended up falling into Kagami's arms. Haruki, who had finished his duty, returned to class. In the hallway, while walking, he thought that Kagami was a cool upperclassman who gave him a calm, adult vibe. When he arrived in front of the class, Haruki was surprised to see Shirayuki there. He then asked what the pretty young man was doing, and what about Akari. Shirayuki told Haruki that Akari had gone home with some of her friends, so Shirayuki was not needed, although the real fact that Shirayuki didn't say was that he actually ordered Akari to go home with her friends so Shirayuki could return to Haruki. Shirayuki told Haruki that the movie they saw last time was really fun. He wanted to know if Haruki had time that day, but unfortunately, Haruki already had plans. Shirayuki wanted to know why Haruki didn't have time for him. Before Haruki could answer, Kagami-senpai appeared to pick Haruki up. Shirayuki could only be stunned to see his crush leaving with another man. Haruki and Kagami went to a gardening store. Haruki went with Kagami because he needed Kagami to tell him what to choose and buy. This had something to do with a broken plant pot at school. When he found what he needed to buy, it turned out to be quite expensive. Kagami volunteered to buy it and cover the cost because he felt he had enough money from his part-time job. Haruki was a little hesitant, but then Kagami said that he could repay him by buying him something later. They went to a rather feminine cafe and bought crepes. Haruki asked if it was enough to repay Kagami for his kindness. Kagami felt it was enough. He had wanted to try those crepes for a long time, but because the place was crowded with girls, he didn't dare to go alone. Haruki felt happy with what he did. At first, he assumed that Kagami, who was 1 year older than him, had a very mature attitude compared to him. But after that day, he realized that Kagami actually had a childish attitude that was not much different from him. Both of them have almost the same taste. Unknowingly, Haruki left a little cream near his lips. Kagami, who realized it, tried to clean the cream with his hand. Haruki was surprised. Kagami explained that he was only trying to clean the cream left on Haruki's face. He also asked if Haruki had ever gone to that place with other people. And no, Haruki had gone with his friends. Kagami wanted to know if the friends Haruki meant were all men. Haruki replied, asking if it seemed like he would have female friends. Kagami was thinking. Haruki was silent with a confused expression. Kagami was quite sure that the friend Haruki meant was the figure he saw in class, and in an instant, Shirayuki confirmed that the friend Haruki meant was him. Haruki was surprised. Shirayuki decided to join and sit next to Haruki. Haruki introduced Kagami-senpai to Shirayuki and Shirayuki to Kagami-senpai. Haruki explained to Shirayuki that Kagami-senpai was the one who helped him fix the flower bed that Haruki accidentally broke. Shirayuki wanted to know what Haruki meant and how it happened. From Shirayuki's expression, Haruki slightly realized that something was wrong. To him, Shirayuki seemed to be in a bad mood. Kagami-senpai joined the conversation and seemed to have just realized there was a beautiful man like a girl in his school. Shirayuki said that he was a transfer student who had just moved to their school in the spring. Kagami responded that he looked familiar to Shirayuki. He felt familiar and even assumed that he and Shirayuki might have been in the same elementary school together. Kagami was convinced that their meeting was fate. Kagami was convinced that all meetings were predetermined destiny. Cherish that destiny. Kagami-senpai's words continued to echo in Haruki's mind. He thought of his first meeting with Shirayuki in the biology room and his first meeting with Kagami that day. Haruki felt very grateful to fate for bringing him together with good figures. Shirayuki seemed to point at a gloomy expression for some reason. Haruki shared his enthusiasm for the movie he liked with Shirayuki. Unusually, Shirayuki seemed calmer and uninterested. The beautiful young man was still thinking about Kagami's words about meeting and destiny. Shirayuki seemed to dislike Kagami. Haruki thought Shirayuki's attitude was caused by his uninteresting story. Seeing his crush seem disappointed, Shirayuki said that it wasn't that Haruki's story was boring, it was just that Shirayuki had a slight headache that day. Haruki reflexively touched Shirayuki's forehead with his palm to check the beautiful young man's body temperature. Haruki was worried, even though he didn't feel any increase in Shirayuki's high temperature. Haruki advised Shirayuki to go home immediately and rest. Shirayuki blushed for a moment, but when Haruki said that he was also busy that day and not long after Kagami-senpai appeared to greet Haruki, Shirayuki suddenly felt annoyed again. That day, Haruki and Kagami were going to watch the movie that Haruki had just talked about with Shirayuki. Haruki looked enthusiastic, while Shirayuki was annoyed and surprised because this was the first time he didn't go home with Haruki. Kagami wanted to know if Shirayuki wasn't coming with them. Haruki replied that Shirayuki was a little unwell that day, so he was going home to rest. Shirayuki was silent, watching Haruki and Kagami leave. From behind, Akari came and told Shirayuki that Haruki had been stolen from them both. Shirayuki turned away. Akari was a little worried about her brother. What if Haruki suddenly disappeared? She wanted to know if there was nothing they could do to prevent that from happening. Akari knew that Shirayuki was feeling upset, and it was caused by Kagami. Shirayuki was surprised that Akari knew. Akari then explained that Kagami was a popular student who looked like a celebrity. Good looks, good grades, kind and reliable were the images that stuck to Kagami. Kagami's figure was not only popular among female students, but also among students and even teachers. Kagami's popularity spread to Akari's school. There was even a fan club at her school consisting of people who idolized Kagami. Shirayuki seemed to be able to surrender in this matter. Akari asked Shirayuki to confirm that the young man seems so close to Haruki. Haruki is a good young man, and he doesn't have any excessive demands toward anyone. Akari wants to comfort Shirayuki, but Shirayuki is already gloomy. According to Shirayuki, Kagami-senpai is definitely a special figure. Akari gives up on comforting Shirayuki. The girl suddenly panics because she remembers that tomorrow she has an exam. If she fails the exam, she will have to take extra classes. Finally, Shirayuki helps Akari study. This was done because, according to Shirayuki, if Akari took extra classes, not only Akari, but Haruki would also have to come home late because he was waiting for Akari. Shirayuki didn't want that to happen. While Shirayuki focused on helping Akari study, the girl felt anxious, and her heart was beating fast. It was the first time for Akari to bring a strange man into her room. She was alone with Shirayuki in her room. Akari hoped that her mother wouldn't come home early that day, so she wouldn't get into trouble. While Akari continued to feel nervous, Shirayuki looked closely at the material that Akari had to master. That is just a review from middle school, so if Akari can't get it right now, then she should go back to junior high school and learn it all over again. Akari could only surrender to Shirayuki's very annoying attitude. Not long after, it was heard that Haruki had arrived home. Shirayuki immediately went enthusiastically to the front door to welcome the arrival of his crush. Akari could only be silent, unable to understand how a beautiful young man who had just been so annoying to her could change his attitude 180 degrees like a puppy waiting for its owner to come home. They went downstairs but were so surprised by Shirayuki and everyone there. Shirayuki and Akari were surprised that Haruki came with Kagami, while Haruki was surprised that Shirayuki was at his house. Shirayuki asked why Kagami came home with Haruki. Haruki replied that he told Kagami that Haruki had a reading book version of the movie they had watched. Kagami then said that he wanted to read it, and Haruki decided to lend his book to his senior. Haruki went upstairs to get the book, leaving Shirayuki and Kagami at the front door area. The two looked unfriendly and even radiated an aura of fierce competition. Haruki came down with the book in question and lent it to Kagami. After receiving the book, Kagami excused himself and promised to return the book as soon as he finished it. Haruki returned to Shirayuki, who was still in his house, but Shirayuki looked very upset. The beautiful young man thought that Haruki was quite defenseless. Shirayuki tried to remind him that bringing someone he didn't know well to come to the house was quite a dangerous thing to do. Haruki didn't understand what Shirayuki meant because he thought Kagami-senpai was a good person. Shirayuki then reminded Haruki that the judgment was too hasty because Haruki had only just known Kagami until yesterday. Haruki still doesn't understand what Shirayuki is trying to say, as in his eyes, Kagami-senpai doesn't seem like a dangerous person. Because Haruki insists on his assessment, Shirayuki decides to give in and go home. Haruki is confused by Shirayuki's attitude, while Akari now realizes how stupid and insensitive Haruki is. Turning to Kagami, the handsome young man noticed Haruki's habit of marking his novels with sticky notes. Kagami found it incredibly cute. Haruki had tried to contact Shirayuki, but none of his messages or phone calls were answered. Haruki began to feel confused as to why Shirayuki was acting like this, since all he had done was lend a book to their senior. He didn't think Shirayuki should be that angry. Gradually, Haruki began to conclude that Shirayuki's anger was due to her poor communication skills, coupled with her overly anxious attitude. Haruki decided to apologize to Shirayuki that very day. His thoughts, filled with Shirayuki, were suddenly interrupted by a call from someone. Before arriving at school, Haruki accidentally met Kagami, who was also on his way to school. Kagami thanked Haruki for the book he had lent him. Kagami seemed to really like the story of the novel, and Haruki also enjoyed hearing comments from others about something he also liked. There was something that was quite bothering Kagami after he came home from Haruki's house yesterday. He asked Haruki if he and Shirayuki were okay because, based on what Kagami saw at Haruki's house yesterday, Shirayuki seemed to really dislike Kagami being at Haruki's house. Haruki was a bit confused about how to answer Kagami's concerns, as it might offend his senior. However, he did feel a little worried about Shirayuki, more precisely, anxious. Kagami then explained that he had been worried a while ago, but that his concern was directed at Haruki. Hearing this, Haruki felt compelled to thank Kagami-senpai. Not only that, Kagami, like Akari before, also asked Haruki to be careful with Shirayuki. Honestly, Haruki himself was confused as to why people always told him to be careful with Shirayuki. But this time, Kagami-senpai, as one of the people who also warned Haruki to be careful with Shirayuki, gave a reason why the young man should be careful with Shirayuki. Kagami admitted that he had a friend who had gone to same school as Shirayuki. His friend then told Kagami that Shirayuki Sims is a case of Munchausen by proxy, or in other words, it's helping people who are suffering or in need. That is a mental illness due to which he needs attention. Apparently, when Shirayuki was in first grade, he approached a student who was getting bullied. Haruki was very shocked when he heard Kagami-senpai's explanation. Even if that really happened, it means that everything Shirayuki has done so far is done with a certain purpose, not out of sincerity. At first, Haruki was a little reluctant, saying he didn't really understand, as Shirayuki might have been genuinely doing good because of his inherent good nature. Kagami then continued, explaining that someone had ordered his classmates to bully a student, and it turned out that person was Shirayuki himself. While there was such a complex scenario surrounding him, Shirayuki himself was already in class that day because he had come too early. Several girls greeted him in class because it was unusual for the beautiful young man to be sitting comfortably in his seat. With a melancholy face, Shirayuki simply replied that he couldn't sleep last night. These words and expressions then invited laughter from the girls who had spoken to him. They then offered Shirayuki to join them for karaoke after school. However, as usual, Shirayuki would always refuse these invitations. The beautiful young man seemed so unenthusiastic in the morning, but when he accidentally saw Haruki's figure from his classroom window, Shirayuki's melancholy expression changed to cheerful. The day then passed quite calmly as usual. When the school bell rang, a group of Shirayuki and Haruki's classmates were so enthusiastic about going to karaoke. Shirayuki also rushed to Haruki's table to invite him to go home with him, but this time Haruki decided to participate in the karaoke event held by his classmate. The decision then made Shirayuki quite surprised, because he had always known Haruki as someone who didn't like such events. Shirayuki tried to get Haruki to skip karaoke and go home with him, but Shirayuki's invitation instead made Haruki misunderstand. This morning, when with Kagami, Haruki was also told that Shirayuki deliberately attracted attention by helping those in distress. Haruki then asked the reason why Shirayuki had been helping and approaching him. He wanted to know if everything Shirayuki did to him was because Haruki was a victim of bullying by several students. Shirayuki was not given a chance to answer at all. Haruki even concluded his own answer and left Shirayuki. Haruki finally didn't attend the karaoke event held by his classmates. He just walked away while his mind was full of assumptions that confirmed what Kagami-senpai said was true about him having to be careful with Shirayuki. Haruki remembered all the jokes and things he went through with Shirayuki, but the peak of willingness even made him shed tears when he concluded that all the things and fun he had felt with Shirayuki were just lies. Haruki, who was walking in the hallway without looking where he was going, suddenly bumped into someone who turned out to be Kagami. In class, Shirayuki still stood pensive and thought about all of Haruki's words just now. He also began to doubt his intentions all this time when approaching Haruki. Was it true that Haruki's assumption that Shirayuki approached him only because the young man was a victim of bullying? But honestly, Shirayuki also knew that the reason he approached Haruki was because he wanted to tell Haruki that it was okay for him to be himself. Shirayuki himself was quite hurt when he saw Haruki before. But the thing that made him hurt even more was that Haruki didn't believe that Haruki was good, and Shirayuki wanted to change. That was the reason why Shirayuki could fall in love with Haruki. What happened to him today made the beautiful young man so hurt. His heart hurt so much when he knew that Haruki now hated him. Even this morning, when he saw Kagami's figure beside Haruki, it made Shirayuki doubt himself even more, because the one who should be by Haruki's side was him. That day, he had to go home alone again. His thoughts were in disarray. Shirayuki was still convinced that he truly loved Haruki, but his feelings of love would be useless if Haruki hated him. His obsession remained the same, wanting to make Haruki him because he was the only one he needed. His thoughts were then shattered by Akari's arrival, who reprimanded him. The girl saw the figure who had been chasing her brother, walking alone with a blank stare and tears in his eyes. Akari suspected she knew what had made the beautiful young man so sad today. The girl then suddenly brought up Kagami, whom she had nothing against. Honestly, Kagami seemed shallow to Akari, but she didn't think he hung out with anyone in particular. However, what worried Akari wasn't that, but rather the recent incident where so many people were surrounding her brother. Akari then explained that there were several people in her class who appeared to be members of Kagami's fan club. It's possible these people knew more about Kagami. Shirayuki was enthusiastic and wanted Akari to ask them about Kagami right away, but Akari refused, saying they couldn't. His distracted mind didn't realize that the day's school activities had already ended. At the same time, in another place, Haruki apparently chose to go with Kagami. During the trip, Kagami then asked if Haruki had spoken to Shirayuki, and the answer was yes. Haruki said that he had asked Shirayuki, but he didn't get an answer from the beautiful young man. Kagami thought that Haruki's way was a little harsh. He felt quite responsible for what happened to Haruki and Shirayuki. Haruki then thanked Kagami, even though he had spoken to Shirayuki, but in the process, he promised not to mention Kagami or Kagami's old friend, who had gone to school with Shirayuki. Haruki actually thanked Kagami. He expressed his feelings that he honestly wanted Shirayuki to respond to his question with an angry attitude and deny Haruki's accusations, but what he got instead was Shirayuki's silence. Honestly, Haruki also didn't really believe the story related to Shirayuki, but after thinking about it, it turned out that he didn't really know or recognize Shirayuki. Without realizing it, he also told Kagami about his past, where he was bullied, and then Shirayuki came as a prince on a white horse for him. If what Kagami said was true, then everything Shirayuki did was really just for the purpose of drawing attention to himself. Whereas previously, he was sure that Shirayuki really saved him, but his thoughts were now the opposite. Shirayuki regretted that all the feelings shown by Shirayuki for him were just lies, but even so, his feelings for Shirayuki were sincere. Hearing Haruki's story made Kagami show a surprised expression. Kagami then decided to just believe what Haruki believed. They decided to close the topic about Shirayuki that day. However, Kagami wanted Haruki to promise him that if one day it was proven that Shirayuki was truly the type of person they trusted, then Haruki would not hesitate to rely on Kagami before Haruki got his heart broken. Haruki promised. He then took off his glasses to wipe away his tears. He was so grateful to have been allowed to meet Kagami. Kagami then invited Haruki to come to his house, which turned out to be not far from where they were at that time. At first, Haruki was reluctant because he thought it would be uncomfortable for the host if Haruki came to visit suddenly. But when he was told that Kagami lived alone because his parents were working, Haruki decided to go along. Without Haruki realizing it, Kagami, who was walking a step ahead, showed an odd smile. That afternoon, it was drizzling. Akari was still with Shirayuki. She wasn't sure what they were doing was right. Akari couldn't believe how far Shirayuki would go for her brother. They went to an apartment where a girl from the same school as Akari lived. The girl was Miney. Akari initially tried knocking on the door to get Miney to come out, but there was no answer until Shirayuki intervened. The girl behind the door was very surprised when she heard Shirayuki's voice and wanted to know who the people behind the door were. Shirayuki admitted that he was Akari's boyfriend. Akari was certainly very surprised because this had never been planned before. Shirayuki didn't feel burdened by doing such things to achieve his goals. He then said that he only wanted to know things related to Kagami from Miney. Miney then sounded quite panicked as to why Akari's lover wanted to know about Kagami. Shirayuki then replied that he was one of the students who idolized Kagami, and that other students were Shirayuki's friends who also idolized Kagami. So Shirayuki felt that he should know more about Kagami than his friends. Miney then said that she saw it. Akari and Shirayuki were then confused by what Miney had seen. Maini then said that previously she wanted to know more about Kagami, and even wanted to get closer to her idol. Maini went to follow Kagami wherever the young man went, and even saw Kagami meet a girl. The girl Kagami met was famous for being flamboyant. Maini became more determined to follow the two because she felt worried. Based on that piece of the story, they then concluded that maybe the flamboyant girl was Kagami's lover. Even Maini had thought so. Kagami took the girl home, and at that time, Maini also decided to go home. The story was cut off, and Maini was silent. Akari and Shirayuki were at the peak of their curiosity and demanded that Maini continue the story. Maini then finished her story by saying that she had heard a scream before she actually went home. The scream came from inside Kagami's house. Maini's voice seemed to tremble. The girl told her story while being afraid. She testified that it was the first time Maini had heard a scream that sounded squeezed out. The identity of the girl who entered Kagami's house was the girl who had previously been reported missing, Kishimoto Yuka. Everyone was trembling. Maini was still afraid even then, and as a result, she locked herself in her room. Shirayuki immediately took a step and left while Akari chased after him. Akari wanted to know where Shirayuki was rushing off to in the pouring rain like that. Shirayuki then answered that he was going to Akari's house, which was also Haruki's house. Akari looked panicked because if Shirayuki left at that time, then the ones she would meet at their residence would be Akari's mother. If that was the case, then at least Shirayuki wanted to know where Haruki was. He asked Akari to contact her brother, but when the girl called home, her mother, who was the one who answered the phone, said that Haruki had sent a message to her mother that the young man would not come home because he was staying at Shirayuki's house. Hearing this, Shirayuki ran even faster under the pouring rain. Meanwhile, at Kagami's house, Haruki was bound and just regaining consciousness. His hands and feet were tied with rope to the corners of the bed. Haruki, who had just regained consciousness, was greeted by Kagami holding something dangerous. Haruki had just woken up. He didn't know exactly where he was, but his last memory was of himself receiving an invitation to come to Kagami-senpai's house. Once there, Haruki enjoyed a cup of tea that Kagami served him. His memory ended there. What he did after drinking the cup of tea, Haruki didn't remember at all. He didn't know what was happening to him, but what was certain was that his movements were limited because his hands and feet were tied to each end of the bed. Kagami was there asking Haruki not to force himself to move too much because he would hurt himself. Haruki smiled awkwardly, seeing Kagami there in his tight situation. Haruki asked Kagami about what happened to him. Kagami grabbed Haruki's tied wrists carefully. The handsome young man said that Haruki shouldn't hurt himself because Haruki's body belonged to Kagami. Haruki's gaze immediately hinted at the young man's fear, especially when Kagami appeared to lick the scratches on Haruki's wrist that appeared from rough friction with the rope that bound him. Haruki still didn't understand the situation he was facing. Kagami started to turn on a device that looked like a stun gun now, and then. He repeated Haruki's previous sentence when he told Kagami that he was so grateful to have met Kagami. Those words made Kagami feel that Haruki was truly an adorable figure. He also felt very happy to have met Haruki. Kagami had unbuttoned all of Haruki's uniform shirt, revealing the smooth skin of the tied-up young man. Haruki tried to speak, but Kagami didn't hear. The handsome young man apologized first to Haruki because what he would do to Haruki afterward would be painful for Haruki. Before he could respond, Haruki had to receive electric shocks from Kagami. Not just once, but many times. Haruki screamed because of the pain that spread throughout his body. The young man was unable to fight back while Kagami, who was the perpetrator, seemed to react so happily that he shed tears. Kagami didn't care what Haruki felt, but the handsome young man said that he loved Haruki. Kagami was sure Haruki wouldn't care about what they did. Kagami was sure that he was a strong man. Until then, only girls liked Kagami. Girls are fragile and easily destroyed. Therefore, girls alone are not enough for Kagami. That's why Kagami was so grateful to have met Haruki. When Kagami said those things, Haruki realized that his senpai was crazy. All the stories about Shirayuki were very doubtful of their truth, but Haruki believed them unilaterally without checking the truth. Haruki cried, holding back his pain, both physically and in his heart, guilty of hurting Shirayuki. Kagami started to climb on top of him and could no longer hold himself back, but his hopes were crushed when he heard Haruki mutter an apology to Shirayuki. Instantly, Kagami was overcome with anger. With the stun gun still in his hand, Kagami hit Haruki in the face. Kagami could not accept that Haruki dared to mention another man's name in front of him. While continuing to beat Haruki, Kagami promised that he would handle Shirayuki. In Kagami's eyes, Shirayuki was a figure who would do anything for the person she loved. But even so, Kagami also remained convinced that he was the one Haruki loved. Haruki remembered his various memories with Shirayuki. In the midst of his pain, Haruki told Kagami that if Kagami dared to touch Shirayuki, Haruki would never forgive Kagami. Kagami became increasingly violent. His emotions grew crazier, and he beat Haruki mercilessly. Haruki was certain that if he continued like this without fighting back, death would surely come his way. Amidst this situation, Kagami was getting excited. It was his first time doing an adult scene with another man. Haruki, who could do nothing, only hoped to apologize to Shirayuki before death took him. Shirayuki's face was clearly visible in his mind. Suddenly, a flower vase broke right after hitting the back of Kagami's head. Kagami fell, and Shirayuki appeared to save Haruki. Not only Shirayuki, but Akari also came, but was asked by Shirayuki to wait. Shirayuki entered the room alone, carrying a vase of roses. Shirayuki rushed to untie the rope on Haruki's hands and feet. Haruki was still confused as to why Shirayuki was there. In all his remaining consciousness, Haruki apologized to Shirayuki, but soon after, the young man fell unconscious again. Kagami got back up. The vase that hit his head was not able to make the handsome young man lose consciousness. Kagami laughed, praising the speed of Shirayuki's attack. Shirayuki remained silent, but counterattacked using an umbrella aimed at Kagami's neck. Unfortunately, Kagami was also fast enough to stop the umbrella from piercing his throat. Kagami again praised Shirayuki, but also advised that if he wanted to attack, Shirayuki should target the opponent's eyes like Kagami did to Shirayuki. Shirayuki managed to dodge but fell to the floor. Akari arrived in the room, worried about her brother and his friend. Shirayuki was too late to warn Akari not to get close to him. Kagami had already re-grabbed the stun gun he had used to torture Haruki. Kagami aimed the stun gun at Akari, but Shirayuki managed to protect the girl. Kagami laughed, seeing Shirayuki looking helpless. He also said that Haruki lasted longer than Shirayuki did. Shirayuki had difficulty moving, but he had to. By carrying the shards of the flower vase, Shirayuki was able to knock Kagami down. Shirayuki immediately cut the rope that he had not had time to cut. After Haruki managed to get free, Shirayuki handed him to Akari to be taken to a safe place. Kagami was still getting up, so Shirayuki had to stay there to block Kagami. Kagami, who fell repeatedly, did not want to let Shirayuki take Haruki from him. Kagami and Shirayuki will now start playing together. It seems that the stun gun has a big impact on Shirayuki. Kagami said that if Shirayuki hadn't appeared, then the beautiful young man wouldn't have to feel the pain of the stun gun. Shirayuki was quite weak, and Kagami beat him up badly. Despite looking like that, Kagami still said that he would go easy on Shirayuki. Shirayuki still didn't give up. He held one of Kagami's legs until Kagami was amazed by his spirit. Kagami didn't stop. With all his strength, he stepped on Shirayuki's knee, making the beautiful young man scream in pain. Shirayuki's beautiful face was ruined by cries of pain. Shirayuki looked desperate, but it was his expression now that made Kagami think that Shirayuki was truly beautiful. Shirayuki was still struggling. Both of his hands grabbed Kagami's face, and in an instant, he slammed his head against Kagami. Shirayuki asked Kagami to let go of Haruki, but Kagami had already set Haruki as his ultimate love. For Kagami, Haruki was the only figure worthy and capable of accepting his love, even though Kagami's own mother couldn't do. Kagami's past was quite sad. His father was an intelligent person and worked overseas. His career was good, but his partner, Kagami's mother, was just a stupid girl. Kagami's mother and Kagami himself were also often beaten by Kagami's father. Kagami's mother had no qualities whatsoever. His mother kept saying that the only thing that kept her going was little Kagami. However, all of that was unreal for Kagami because his mother ended up leaving him by hanging herself. Kagami's story is quite strange even for Kagami himself. His heart felt empty after his mother's departure, so that even now Kagami has never felt anything again. His mother's love seems like it wasn't enough. For Kagami, it was just a mistake, but until now, Kagami has still been trying to recreate that kind of love. Kagami wants to fall in love with a partner who is his ultimate love, like his mother. Kagami sees that in Haruki. Haruki is a figure who will not hesitate to like someone. Haruki just likes people so easily, like making a self-sacrifice with unconditional love. Haruki is the only one Kagami needs. Kagami has found his ultimate love in Haruki. Kagami turned around. It was time to get Haruki back. After all, Shirayuki wouldn't be able to move because of the wound on his leg. Shirayuki couldn't understand Kagami's definition of love. Kagami said that he loved Haruki, but at the same time, he also tortured Haruki. Shirayuki pitted Kagami. Kagami, who felt unacceptable, then pulled Shirayuki's hair until the beautiful man became more erect. Shirayuki didn't stop talking. He doubted Kagami's mother's love for little Kagami. If the woman had loved Kagami as deeply as Kagami had said, then why would she choose to die? If that was the definition of love, then Shirayuki very confidently stated that he didn't want that kind of love. Kagami was getting angrier. Shirayuki did seek love, but that was because he knew it would be returned well. Shirayuki had given all his love to Haruki, and he knew all that love he had given. Then, Haruki returned it to Shirayuki. Shirayuki had truly fallen in love with Haruki. Shirayuki continued to say words that made Kagami feel disgusted. Kagami was now even gripping Shirayuki's neck tightly, making it even harder for the beautiful young man to breathe. Kagami now really intends to eliminate Shirayuki. For him, Haruki is in the depths of hell for Kagami. And all of that is Shirayuki's fault because Shirayuki is powerless. Shirayuki could only laugh. His laughter made Kagami feel strange. When his two hands were around Shirayuki's neck, Shirayuki's hand flew freely, landing a shard of the vase right at Kagami's eye. Shirayuki followed Kagami's advice correctly, that if you want to paralyze someone, the target that must be sabotaged is the target's vision, specifically the eyes. Kagami screamed. Now his only vision remained functional. Kagami fell, feeling excruciating pain from the loss of his left vision. At that moment, Shirayuki grabbed the stun gun lying under the bed. Kagami warned that Shirayuki could not just eliminate Kagami. Shirayuki then warned Kagami not to misunderstand him. Shirayuki did not know how to injure Kagami simply. He only knew how to eliminate. Not only that, Shirayuki also knew that Kagami's stun gun could probably pierce through Kagami. Shirayuki was about to start Kagami's retaliation with the handsome young man's chest. Kagami panicked and hysterically also surprised. How could Shirayuki still be able to act when the beautiful young man had been electrocuted several times and even his legs had been broken? The one who was now in danger was Kagami. Kagami was afraid, but Shirayuki remained on his goal. Shirayuki felt unable to stop, even though his face was now improving, until a smile broke out on his lips. Kagami, who was increasingly cornered, still had the will not to disappear. Therefore, he tried to distract Shirayuki by telling him that in the corner of the room, there was a CCTV camera that could record their situation at that time. Kagami said that if Shirayuki continued with his intentions, the beautiful young man could be arrested for assault and end up in prison and unable to attend school as usual, and that means Shirayuki would not be able to meet Haruki. Shirayuki understood very well what Kagami said, but that did not stop his intentions, even though the beautiful young man said that he would not let anyone hold him in prison. The beautiful young man then pointed a stun gun at Kagami's face, but Kagami rushed to prostrate himself, begging Shirayuki for forgiveness. Kagami said that he would give up on his love for Haruki. Shirayuki didn't really believe it, and there was no reason why he should believe his senpai's words. Kagami still tried to convince Shirayuki not to continue his torture by saying that Haruki was a very soft-hearted person. So if Shirayuki really eliminated Kagami based on a form of revenge for the treatment that Haruki had received, then Haruki might feel guilty. The accumulated guilt could later push Haruki to have the desire to eliminate himself. Shirayuki had imagined this when Kagami said it, but he continued to torture Kagami because the consequences he would receive later were not something his target should think about. Shirayuki stopped when several familiar voices called out his name to check on him condition. Seeing how Shirayuki stopped immediately after hearing Haruki's voice made Kagami realize that Shirayuki wanted to take on the role of a good prince for Haruki. Kagami laughed. Shirayuki then threatened the handsome young man that if in the future Kagami still tried to approach Haruki, Shirayuki would not think twice about eliminating his senior. Even if Kagami or Shirayuki disappeared first, Shirayuki emphasized to Kagami to never forget his threat. Shirayuki came down to Haruki and Akari. They were worried about each other. Shirayuki invited the siblings to go home, but both wanted to know about Kagami. Akari even argued that they should report to the police, but Shirayuki didn't want that to happen. He said that if Kagami were arrested, then he would have a huge guilt for destroying someone's life. Shirayuki even told Haruki that he had made a pact with Kagami, where if Kagami repeated his actions, then she would not hesitate to send Kagami to prison. Shirayuki was determined, as before, to protect Haruki at all costs. His words were rejected this time because Haruki chose to protect Shirayuki. Akari was quite embarrassed by her brother's interaction with Shirayuki. She turned to Shirayuki's leg, which looked badly injured, but the beautiful young man said he was fine. Akari had certainly expected this, but she immediately took action to do what she could to help. Not only Akari, but Haruki also offered Shirayuki a piggyback ride. Initially, Shirayuki, with a shy face, was unsure about accepting Haruki's help, but in the end, he happily accepted. Haruki apologized to Shirayuki for doubting the beautiful young man. Shirayuki didn't seem to take Haruki's actions to heart, doubting Shirayuki's sincerity. However, from this mistake, Haruki now realized that the young man didn't really know Shirayuki well. That's why Haruki could easily believe and be incited by what Kagami said. Shirayuki did feel quite frustrated at first, but that was over. He wanted them to discuss all their doubts and curiosities with each other from then on. If there was something about Shirayuki that Haruki wanted to know, Haruki could ask Shirayuki directly. Shirayuki promised to answer any questions. To begin, Haruki asked if Shirayuki had ever dated anyone before. Hearing this question, Shirayuki was quite surprised and asked if it was true that the first thing Haruki wanted to ask was that. Haruki then withdrew his question, but instead of an answer, what Haruki got at that time was Shirayuki's first kiss. Haruki's face immediately turned bright red with embarrassment. Haruki asked Shirayuki to stop teasing him. Shirayuki then asked Haruki to talk more casually with Shirayuki. From then on, they also promised to talk about anything if they wanted. At home, Kagami has been trying to temporarily treat his left eye. Despite being scarred for life, Kagami is determined not to give up. It seems his target is no longer Haruki, but Shirayuki. A month has passed, and the school is now planning a school trip. Haruki hopes that Shirayuki will be able to join him on this school trip. After an accident involving Kagami, Shirayuki broke his leg and had to be hospitalized for some time, while Haruki never saw Kagami-senpai at school again. There were rumors that he had heard that the handsome young man had transferred to another school. Haruki felt quite guilty for causing Shirayuki to be involved and get seriously injured. Haruki wasn't very enthusiastic about this school trip, but honestly, he really wanted to go with Shirayuki, who also participated in the school trip. Suddenly, someone called his name from a distance. Haruki was shocked to see that the person who had called his name was the person he had missed. That person was Shirayuki. Haruki was still quite worried about the condition of Shirayuki's leg, but the beautiful young man immediately shook his leg to prove to Haruki that there was nothing to worry about because he had completely recovered. Even so, Haruki was still worried because he thought Shirayuki's injury in the accident involving Kagami was truly very serious. Shirayuki was quite happy when his crush worried about him. The beautiful young man then asked Haruki to give him a piggyback ride, like when he broke his bone. Shirayuki, who suddenly climbed onto Haruki's back, made Haruki very surprised and remembered Shirayuki, who at that time given her first kiss to Haruki. They then lost their balance and accidentally hit a girl and fell to the floor. Haruki, who saw the girl still not getting up, then offered his hand to help the girl stand. Haruki's hand was suddenly shortened by a group of students who warned Haruki not to carelessly touch Sodome, the girl's name. Sodome asked the students who protected her not to be rude at school. The girl then apologized to Haruki. Haruki felt that the one who should apologize was her, but hearing those words made Sodome feel amazed by Haruki's kindness. Sodome had held both of Haruki's hands, and this was also witnessed directly by Shirayuki. Not long after, the girl said goodbye to go back to her activities. Saotome's kindness was already well known among the students at their school. Even Shirayuki, who was actually just a transfer student, could feel that Sodome was a popular girl. At their school, Sodome did seem like a celebrity because she was the manager of the soccer club. Her full name is Sodome Madoka. Besides being very popular, Sodome also had a very friendly nature and a very cute appearance. Shirayuki wasn't really interested and even thought the girl was quite strange. Shirayuki changed the topic to Haruki and complained a little that his legs were sore from walking a lot. Shirayuki asked Haruki if the young man could lend him his hand for a moment and hold Shirayuki's hand just until their class. Haruki was quite worried and felt that his suspicions were correct that Shirayuki still hadn't fully recovered. He was willing to lend his hand and hold Shirayuki's hand all the way to class to help the beautiful young man walk. The thing that was bothering Shirayuki was finally put aside. The traces of Sayatome's hand holding Haruki had now been replaced by his own hand. In class, their homeroom teacher announced things related to the school trip, including the guidebook and a list of group members for each student and their duty. Haruki and Shirayuki were in the same group along with several girls in their class. The girls seemed so happy and enthusiastic to be in the same group as Shirayuki, who was known as a beautiful student. Based on what they heard about Shirayuki's condition, who was still in the recovery stage, they were quite worried, but honestly, Shirayuki himself was completely fine. Among them, there was still one name that had not appeared among all the members of the school trip group. The student's name was Akira Terida. Terida was recorded as having never attended school since the middle of their first year, even though Terida was still able to participate in school trip activities like other students. The girls who were members of the same group as Shirayuki displayed worried facial expressions when Terida's name was mentioned. Shirayuki already had an assumption about how problematic Terida was. Everyone seemed to be getting ready for the field trip. The girls were playing rock, paper, scissors, fighting for the seat next to Shirayuki. Haruki was quite curious to see the commotion the girls were causing. The girls seemed to be hiding the game from Haruki. Not long after, Shirayuki arrived with his legs still bandaged. The girls were certainly very enthusiastic while Haruki was still worried about Shirayuki's condition. Shirayuki looked cheerful and only replied to Haruki's morning greeting without the others noticing. Haruki, who was worried, had even done a little research about the place they would visit. He did that so he could know how the route would be and whether Shirayuki, who was not completely in good shape, would be able to enjoy the trip. Of course, Shirayuki was happy with the Haruki's concern, even though in reality, Haruki was just overly concerned about Shirayuki, who was already fine. Shirayuki was immediately approached by girls who wanted to sit in the seat next to him. Shirayuki had not had time to agree, and his attention was already diverted to another commotion. Not far from them, a group of students were seen opposing the presence of a student. The student was cornered and asked to apologize properly, but instead of being afraid or provoked, the student just remained silent. Suddenly, a girl came to break up the crowd. She was Satome. Satome was the figure involved in the problem that made the student hated by many other students. The student was Ahara. Satome asked the students to stop cornering Ahara because Satome was no longer angry like before. Satome also tried to convince the angry students on her behalf to tell Ahara that Ahara must have reflected on what he had done in the past. Ahara did not give any answer and gripped his backpack even tighter. Shirayuki asked to confirm who Ahara was and what he had actually done. The girl who had been fighting to sit next to Shirayuki then answered that according to rumors, Ahara used to be part of the soccer club. When Ahara was in his first year, it was said that Ahara had brought Satome, the manager of the soccer club, to the clubroom. Rumors were heard that Ahara attempted to jump Satome. Because Ahara was caught red-handed, he was finally forced to leave the club activity. Even after the incident, Ahara never came to school for a long time. The girls considered Ahara a terrifying figure. Only Haruki tried to confirm that what he heard was just a rumor. And if what the girls said was just a rumor, then they shouldn't have told it wherever they went. Hearing Haruki's response made the girls confused. Haruki took the initiative to call Ahara to go with them to their bus. Not only that, Haruki even took Ahara's hand and picked him up, taking the young man out of the angry crowd of students. The girl who had been talking about the rumors regarding Ahara was then confused. She didn't know what she had done to make Haruki get pissed off. Their journey was about to begin. Shirayuki asked the girl if it was okay if she sat next to him. He was worried that she might be disturbed when he suddenly fell asleep on her. The other girls laughed, while the girl sitting next to him couldn't imagine what he was saying, even though she seemed genuinely enthusiastic. When they got on the bus, Haruki was already sitting next to Ahara. Even though they weren't that far apart, Shirayuki still felt a little disappointed. Meanwhile, at his place, Haruki looked worried. He didn't know what to do. He felt a bit bad about all the rumors going around. While Haruki was still thinking about whether he should talk to Ahara, Ahara spoke first, asking what Haruki really wanted. Haruki didn't realize that Ihara had noticed his gaze on Ihara. Ihara insisted that Haruki stop looking at him. Talking to him wouldn't make Haruki a hero to Ihara, the young man stated firmly. Haruki then stuttered, confused to explain that he didn't mean it that way. Ihara then said that he hated people like Haruki. Haruki then explained that he simply didn't want someone to be judged based on rumors and assumptions alone. Haruki tried so hard to convince Ihara that he wasn't what Ihara thought. The young man even promised what he had just said. Besides that, Haruki also apologized to Ihara if, despite everything he said, Ihara still didn't like him. Hearing Haruki's explanation, Ihara immediately turned his face away. With Ihara's attitude like that, Haruki said that he was very happy when he knew that Ihara had come. School trips like that are rare, so Haruki was definitely the one they wanted to join. He thought the trip would be a great, lifelong memory for all of them. Haruki then introduced himself to Ihara. Besides extending his hand for a shake, Haruki also told Ihara that if he ever had any problems, he could talk to him. Ihara remained silent, unresponsive. From his seat, Shirayuki watched what Haruki was doing. Shirayuki really wanted to sit next to Haruki. Seeing how Haruki kept trying to befriend Ihara made Shirayuki worried. If Haruki kept getting close to Ihara, then Haruki could also look like a bad guy. However, Shirayuki couldn't do anything. Shirayuki could no longer always focus on Haruki during the trip because the girl next to him kept talking to him. The other girls sitting behind Shirayuki did the same. They told him about the existence of a cliff known as Itoko Cliff, which was located near the campsite. It was about 25 meters high, and there had been a fatal accident in the past. But furthermore, because of the atmospheric pressure, you can see the stars really well. In addition, you can even see the Milky Way as long as you are in the right place. Not only that, there is even a saying that if you confess your love under the Milky Way, there is a jinx that makes the couple's love never fade until the very end. Hearing this story, Shirayuki seemed quite enthusiastic. The girl next to Shirayuki then tried to ask the young man to hang out with her. But Shirayuki instead spoke, as if he heard that the girl said she was afraid of heights. Shirayuki confirmed that he is also afraid of heights. Their bus finally arrived, so the students had to unpack their belongings to move to the inn. Haruki looked so tired and hot when carrying so many things. The road they took was indeed uphill, so it was natural for a young man like Haruki to feel so tired and hot with the load he had to carry in both hands. The items were not only his, but also Shirayuki's luggage. Shirayuki actually felt that he was able to just carry his own bag, but Haruki refused because he still cared about Shirayuki's leg, which had not fully healed. In front of them, Ihara was seen looking towards the Itoko Cliff, where at the end of the ravine there was a guardrail and a warning sign. Ihara looked so angry and even kept muttering that he was going to kill someone. Shirayuki had a moment to stare at Ihara. His attention was diverted again when the girls asked him to slow down. Shirayuki was walking so fast because Haruki was carrying his luggage. The girls then looked around for Haruki. Shirayuki pointed out that Haruki had already left a few moments ago. Not only was Haruki gone, but Ihara was also nowhere to be seen. When they arrived at the inn, Haruki was lying down exhausted. Shirayuki came to him, worried about Haruki's condition. The young man was so tired that Haruki started to feel dizzy. Shirayuki said that it was the result of pushing himself too hard. Haruki apologized to Shirayuki for his condition. Haruki just didn't want Shirayuki's leg to get hurt again. Shirayuki was okay because Haruki carried his bag. Besides, Haruki wasn't the only one who passed out due to exhaustion. Ihara was also lying down exhausted right next to Haruki. Not long after, a student announced that it was their turn to take a bath. Haruki got up because it would be better if he got ready to take a bath. He also didn't forget to wake Ihara because they all needed to go join the girl in the bath now. Haruki was about to lift the towel that was covering Ihara's eyes. Ihara was very surprised. He shouted for Haruki not to do whatever he wanted. Ihara even ordered him to go ahead without him to the bath because he was not going. Haruki then felt confused. They can't leave someone who is sick. Ihara overreacted. Spontaneously, the young man tried to cover his face. He yelled at Haruki, ordering him to leave and calling him annoying. Haruki was reluctant to leave until Shirayuki persuaded him to listen to what Ihara had to say. They then left Ihara, still cowering in the same place, covering his face. In the bathroom, while the other students were having fun in the water, Haruki was seen soaking, leaning on the edge, lost in thought. Thinking about how Ihara didn't seem to be enjoying their trip at all. Haruki's mind was all about Ahara at that moment. The young man didn't even notice that Shirayuki was slowly approaching and trying to surprise him. And sure enough, Haruki was very surprised when Shirayuki splashed warm water on Haruki's face. While Haruki was very surprised, Shirayuki actually really enjoyed Haruki's shocked expression. Shirayuki said that his actions just now were because of Haruki's own fault for not caring about Shirayuki. Shirayuki was even disappointed because he couldn't even sit next to Haruki on the bus. Haruki was surprised and couldn't understand what Shirayuki had just said. Shirayuki seemed to act like a child whose wishes were not fulfilled. The young man complained because he was really looking forward to that, because that was his first time staying overnight with Haruki. Haruki didn't know Shirayuki felt that way. The young man could only express his apology for not realizing Shirayuki's wishes. Shirayuki was upset. He said it was okay, and even called Haruki indifferent to him. Seeing Shirayuki sulking made Haruki try to explain that he was also quite looking forward to that too. He had the same feelings as Shirayuki, only Haruki honestly said that he was also curious about Ahara. Hearing that, Shirayuki was shocked and surprised. How could a lover question his lover's interest in someone else? Shirayuki pressed Haruki to answer his question about why we are curious about Ahara. Haruki, who was surprised, then tried to explain that he didn't mean the strange thoughts Shirayuki was thinking at that time. Shirayuki then wanted to know what Haruki meant by his words. Haruki replied that he was just worried about Ahara. Seeing Ahara reminded Haruki of himself. Hearing Haruki's words made Shirayuki calm down a bit, having been confused. Shirayuki remembered Haruki's words about how he was struggling, but couldn't tell anyone until he met Shirayuki. Their conversation was interrupted when some students asked Haruki about Ahara, who was in their group. The students informed Haruki that Ahara seemed to have gotten involved in a fight again with the soccer club. Hearing this, Haruki rushed off to see Ahara, followed by Shirayuki, of course. The students' words were true. When they arrived, they saw Ahara, who remained silent, being provoked by the soccer club members. Ahara was accused of joining the trip because he was still after Sodom. Ahara completely ignored the soccer club's comments, even when Haruki came to intervene. When Haruki tried to help Ahara, the soccer club members tried to convince Haruki that Ahara was a criminal. Hearing himself called a criminal made Ahara furious, and he chose to leave. The soccer club members, feeling their business was unfinished, rushed off to chase Ahara. Haruki had shouted to stop Ahara, but he was not heard. Shirayuki remained silent, but it seemed the young man realized something. Ahara ran into the bushes. He was fed up with the various things the soccer club members had said carelessly about him. They were free to say anything, but Ahara felt like he couldn't go home yet because he still had something to prove. Ahara thought the students chasing him had lost track of him, but it was Shirayuki who managed to find him. Ahara was very surprised. He didn't know Shirayuki, but he knew they were in the same group. Besides, Ahara was also surprised how Shirayuki could chase him and kick him when Shirayuki's bandaged leg was still broken. Shirayuki didn't pay attention to Ahara's questions. He actually spoke because he had something to ask Ahara. Shirayuki asked calmly about who Ahara was actually trying to kill. Ahara looked wary. Who exactly was that young man? After his arrival, the atmosphere was different from when it was daytime. Shirayuki tried to guess who Ahara wanted to kill. Although he wasn't sure, Shirayuki mentioned Haruki's name to make sure that it wasn't his favorite that Ahara was trying to kill. Ahara then looked confused when Haruki's name came up in their conversation. Shirayuki really wanted to make sure that Ahara had no intentions towards Haruki. Shirayuki even managed to lock Ahara's movements. Ahara insisted that his target wasn't Haruki. There was no way he would target Haruki when he had no reason to hate Haruki. Hearing that, Shirayuki then smiled and wasn't sure either. According to him, even though Haruki hasn't done anything to Ahara, Haruki is still an easy target. That's why Shirayuki has to protect Haruki, especially from suspicious people like Ahara. In his mind, Ahara couldn't accept it. Compared to him, Shirayuki was way more suspicious than him. Ahara then asked Shirayuki to let him go so he could talk. Shirayuki let Ahara go, but also said that even if Ahara tried to run away from him, he wouldn't stand a chance against Shirayuki. After letting go of Ahara's hand, Shirayuki crouched down to listen to Ahara's words. There was a moment of silence before Ahara finally revealed that the one he was grudging against was that girl. Shirayuki questioned who that girl, Ahara, was referring to. The girl Ahara was referring to was none other than Madoka Sodome. Sodome is the manager of the soccer club. Hearing this, Shirayuki immediately remembered and referred to Sodome as the one Ahara tried to rape. Ihara then spontaneously said that he didn't do it. He didn't attempt rape at all. Ihara began to tell Shirayuki what had actually happened a year ago. At that time, the high school soccer championship regional tournament was about to be held. Ihara was the only freshman who made it as a regular player, and he scored the winning goal and led the team to victory. Because of this, Sodome seemed fascinated and tried to approach Ihara. Sodome was his classmate and manager, who was popular with his team members from the moment Sodome joined the club. However, for some reason, Sodome always gave Ihara extra attention. Sodome always stuck close to Ihara, giving him towels, drinks, massages, and more. Because of this treatment, things started to change. Ihara began to experience unpleasant treatment, starting from his cleats going missing, his uniform being covered in mud before he even put it on, and so on. Ihara just wanted to enjoy playing soccer, but because Sodome would keep calling out to him for something interrupting practice, Ihara kept getting caught up in conversations that had nothing to do with soccer. Things like this continued to happen to Ihara until finally the young man's patience reached its limit. Ihara called Sodome into a room to talk privately. It seems that this isn't the first time. Ihara once again tells Sodome not to treat him special. Sodome doesn't seem to understand. Ihara then explains that he wants Sodome to stop doing things for him that Sodome doesn't do for the other members. Ihara also emphasizes that he can handle things like towels and drinks himself, and then he can also wash his own uniform and take care of his gear. Feeling that what he said was clear enough, Ihara starts to leave. Sodome doesn't seem to want to fulfill Ihara's request. Ihara again expresses his surprise about why Sodome does so much for him when he can do it all himself. Ihara doesn't want the other team members to do something weird if something is going on. After saying everything he feels, Ihara leaves Sodome alone there. Sodome looked, trembling in disbelief, at the treatment she had just received. Sodome then sent a message to Ihara via her cell phone. The message contained a request to meet. Sodome even said that if Ihara came to see her, then Sodome would do whatever he wanted Sodome to do. In the girl's mind, Sodome was trying to make Ihara understand what she was doing to her. After school was over, Ihara thought for a moment that what he did to Sodome might be too harsh. That day, their coach was going to practice dribbling with cones. Ihara was then asked to bring some cones from the storage room. Ihara obediently immediately did what his coach asked. Without him realizing, his bad luck happened that day. When he was about to bring some cones to the field, Sodome suddenly came and kissed him one-sidedly. Ihara spontaneously pushed Sodome. Not finishing there, Sodome started to take off her clothes and even pulled down her underwear. Ihara tried to look away, not understanding what Sodome was going to do. Before acting up, Sodome had called Ihara a naive young man. Ihara, who still didn't know that he was being trapped in a scandal, just remained silent. Sodome screamed, drawing the attention of everyone around her, who wanted to come closer to the storage room and investigate. Ihara was still confused. Shortly after, the coach arrived to check on the situation. At that moment, Sodome immediately ran into his arms, claiming that Ihara had tried to molest her. Ihara denied the accusation, but it was his words that were questioned. Everyone was consumed by Sayatome's fake tears. Ihara was asked to go home, while the coach would try to get an explanation from Sodome once she had calmed down. Outside, as Ihara was about to leave, he was confronted by the students. They believed that Sodome was about to be raped by Ihara. Those who had been jealous and insecure of Ihara from the start then vented their anger on the young man. Ihara was beaten by them. Even one student claimed to have seen Ihara actually harassing Sodome. Of course, Ihara was angry and tried to defend himself, but Ihara was alone. Outnumbered, the young man was tied to the goalpost, and then one by one the students kicked the ball towards Ihara. When it was over, Ihara was left alone. When everyone had gone home, Sodome appeared laughing at the helpless Ihara. Sodome even called Tanaka, the false witness who obeyed Sodome because Sodome promised her service to him. Ihara tried to get up and questioned why Sodome did that to him. The reason was simple. According to Sodome, Ihara was a nuisance. Since then, Ihara has been unable to play soccer. Every time he holds the ball, Ihara feels like he hears Sayatome's voice. Sayatome's shrill laughter echoes in his ears. Even at night, Ihara can't sleep without medication. That's why Ihara feels the need to kill Sodome. Ihara insists on Shirayuki not stopping him because Sodome really needs to die. Shirayuki seems uninterested in stopping Ihara. Instead, he asks what Ihara will do, when, where, and how he will kill Sodome. Ihara replies that night he will lure Sodome out to the cliff and push her off. Shirayuki asks again how Ihara will lure Sodome out. Shirayuki doubted if Sodome would go along with Ihara's invitation. And what about the other soccer team members? How is Ihara going to shake them off? Even if Sodome does come, what if Sodome resists, and what if Ihara fails to push Sodome off? Even if Ihara does manage to kill Sodome, how will Ihara dispose of Sayatome's body? Ihara was shocked by the details of the how that Shirayuki asked. Ihara couldn't understand what Shirayuki said. Shirayuki then said honestly that Ihara's plan would be in vain. Ihara couldn't do that, especially since that night was an important day for Shirayuki. Shirayuki wanted Ihara to at least not cause trouble then. Ihara immediately said that he didn't care about it because whatever the situation, he would still carry out his plan. Ihara had decided to kill Sodome. Shirayuki thought for a moment. He felt he no longer had a choice. For that reason, Ihara was asked to be quiet and just watch. Ihara no longer understood what Shirayuki meant by what he said to him. Shirayuki said that he would take care of Sodome and make her disappear from Ihara's life. Ihara was stunned to hear this statement. The next morning, Ihara remained in bed despite Haruki's attempts to wake him. Haruki was worried because breakfast time was almost over, but Ihara still hadn't woken up. Beside Haruki, Shirayuki looked out the window. Sodome was seen having fun and always surrounded by the soccer team. Shirayuki thought about how he would make Sodome disappear. At the campsite, Sodome had to take care of the club's needs alone because she was the only girl capable of doing domestic work. At that time, she had to wash so many dirty dishes while the water was still very cold. Sodome became the laughingstock of the other girls because the situation looked like a reverse harem genre. They said they were jealous, but in a mocking tone. When Sodome was not defended by anyone, Shirayuki appeared and commented. Sodome was surprised because she felt like she had never seen a handsome figure in her school, but that day Shirayuki appeared in front of her. Shirayuki apologized for suddenly approaching. He introduced himself as a transfer student who was now in Class C. Shirayuki pretended to know Sodome by saying that he knew her from Sayatome's fans in his class, which were quite a lot. Sodome looked flushed hearing that. The other girls looked jealous seeing how Shirayuki approached Sodome. Shirayuki asked why Sodome washed all the dishes alone. He asked as if he cared. Sodome then answered that in their group, the majority were boys, so they all went to gather firewood. Shirayuki pretended to care, cupping Sayatome's hand with his own and blowing on it as if to warm it. Sayatome's face and feelings then blushed. Not only did he pretend to be worried, Shirayuki even offered to wash the cutlery for Sodome. Sodome was very grateful, but also asked why Shirayuki didn't go collect firewood with the students. Shirayuki then took advantage of his leg, which still looked injured. Seeing the comparison on Shirayuki's leg, Sodome was surprised. There was a bandage that looked loose. Shirayuki planned to go to the nurse later, but Sodome saw an opportunity for her. Sodome offered to help wrap it up for him. They then stepped aside for a moment. Sodome adjusted Shirayuki's bandage like the school nurse. Of course, Sodome is an expert at it. After all, she is the manager of a soccer club. Sodome happily offered to help Shirayuki again later if needed. With a happy look, Shirayuki accepted Sayatome's offer. Sodome was at the peak of her joy. She felt like she had found the prince she had been looking for. After finishing with Sodome, Shirayuki returned to Haruki, who appeared to be finishing the task of setting up the tent. Shirayuki praised how skillfully Haruki set up the tent pegs. Haruki was indeed confident in his abilities in setting up tents and the like. When he was a child, his family often took him camping sometimes. Back then, Haruki was always tasked with setting up the tent. Hearing Haruki's story made Shirayuki's eyes light up. The young man hoped to go camping with Haruki next time. Haruki couldn't promise anything. Now that he was an adult, his sister wasn't that into camping, so it was rare for Haruki to go camping anymore. Hearing this, Shirayuki looked a little disappointed. Close behind them, leaning against a tree, Ihara seemed to be watching Shirayuki. He still doubted whether the Shirayuki he saw in his vision was the same Shirayuki who had spoken to him the night before. Shirayuki's habits and behavior were completely different. Ihara still didn't understand the meaning of Shirayuki's words, asking him to stay still and watch. While Ihara was still lost in thought, a girl's voice calling out to Shirayuki made him tense. Ihara spontaneously hid behind a tree to observe from a distance. He really hadn't forgotten the owner of the voice. It was Sodome. Sodome had come to check Shirayuki's bandage. Shirayuki then cheerfully replied that the bandage was fine thanks to Sayatome's extraordinary skills. Sodome smiled. She said that she didn't really know how to set up a tent. Watching their interaction from a distance made Ihara wonder when Shirayuki and Sodome had become close. Sodome immediately took Shirayuki to her tent area so that Shirayuki could watch her and teach her how to build her tent. Shirayuki followed Sayatome's lead while Haruki was quite stunned to see Shirayuki getting further away. His face looked annoyed. Not only Haruki, the girls from his class were also annoyed to see Sodome openly approaching Shirayuki aggressively. The girls had heard rumors about Sodome hitting on all the guys in the soccer club. They were worried that Shirayuki would be Sayatome's next victim. Because he was calm, the girls then asked Haruki's opinion on it. Haruki was not focused. He answered that his tent was almost finished. It really didn't connect with what the girls were asking. At the same time, Ihara also couldn't understand what Shirayuki was actually doing. While with the soccer club, Sodome was invited to play cards by the students, but Sodome refused. Not long after, Shirayuki approached Sodome. Sodome immediately approached, as if she had been waiting for Shirayuki's arrival from the start. It seemed that the students from the soccer club did not like seeing Shirayuki's closeness with their club manager. Shirayuki took Sodome a little away from the crowd. He whispered that night he wanted to sneak out and go stargazing. He invited Sodome to go together to see the Milky Way galaxy. Of course, Sodome immediately accepted the invitation without thinking. After deciding on a place and time for them to meet, Shirayuki was about to return, but Sodome stopped him. The girl was about to do the same thing she did to Ihara a year ago. Sodome was about to kiss Shirayuki one-sidedly, but unlike Ihara, Shirayuki was able to handle it. In an instant, Shirayuki covered her lips with his finger so that Sayatome's lips did not touch his. Sodome was shocked and embarrassed. Sodome looked annoyed. Shirayuki said that they would be in trouble if anyone saw them. Sodome said that she didn't care if anyone saw. Shirayuki then said that there was a reason why they couldn't kiss. Sodome looked shocked. Shirayuki suddenly hugged Sodome from behind while whispering that he wouldn't be able to hold back if they kissed. Hearing Shirayuki's words and actions made Sodome even more confused. Shirayuki did leave, but what the young man just did made Sayatome's heart flutter. Sodome became even more determined to get Shirayuki. That night, when all the students were asleep in their tents, Shirayuki woke up and said goodbye to Haruki, who was sleeping next to him. Shirayuki left while carrying a thermos. In fact, Ihara was still awake. He wanted to know where Shirayuki was going at that hour. Of course, Shirayuki had gone to fulfill his appointment with Sodome. At the appointment, Sodome seemed to have been waiting for Shirayuki's arrival. Without hesitation, Sodome immediately embraced Shirayuki's arm. The girl was captivated because she could see Shirayuki's handsomeness from such a close distance. Shirayuki asked what was wrong with Sodome. Of course, the girl couldn't answer if she was captivated. They then started rushing to a place where they could do stargazing. Shirayuki took Sodome to a place he said he found while looking for firewood earlier. Seeing how extraordinary the place was made Sodome very enthusiastic and excited. Shirayuki started talking about the view of the night sky full of stars at that time. In her mind, Sodome was actually not at all interested in stars and other things. However, she knew that she would sound cuter when she pretended to be moved. Not only did they look at the stars together, Shirayuki took out the thermos he had brought with him. Shirayuki said that he had expected the night to be cold, so he made some hot tea for them. Shirayuki poured a glass for Sodome. The girl seemed very happy to accept Shirayuki's gift. Without hesitation, Sodome immediately drank the hot tea. She felt that Shirayuki must really like her to do something like that. Sodome was still self-conscious. Even though Shirayuki seemed to really like her, Sodome didn't want to take any chances. She would approach Shirayuki slowly and carefully. The girl wouldn't let him go no matter what. Sodome started talking. She discussed how Shirayuki treated her so well. Sodome thought that Shirayuki must be very popular among the girls. Shirayuki then replied that he wasn't so sure. Shirayuki clearly said that he didn't do what he did to Sodome to just anyone. Hearing Shirayuki's words made Sodome start to feel awkward. The girl shyly asked if Shirayuki might have someone he liked. Without hesitation, Shirayuki then confirmed Sayatome's question. Shirayuki did have someone he liked. In Sayatome's mind, she was certain that the person Shirayuki was referring to was herself. Therefore, Sayatome tried her best to keep her expression low. Sayatome asked what kind of person Shirayuki liked. The young man then answered that the person he liked was cute and kind. A little naive sometimes, but also surprisingly brave. Even though they look spaced out, they're actually observing those around them and how they treat everyone equally, which is really amazing for Shirayuki. In their conversation, Shirayuki spoke so ambiguously while Sayatome thought Shirayuki was describing herself. When she was lulled and flattered, Sayatome suddenly felt something strange in her body. Even to hold a glass of warm tea that Shirayuki gave her, Sayatome was unable to. While there was something strange about Sayatome, Shirayuki still couldn't finish describing the person he liked. Sayatome tried to stay conscious because she still hadn't had the chance to express her feelings to Shirayuki. On the verge of her remaining consciousness, Sayatome heard Shirayuki say that the person he liked had a sister. At that time, Sayatome felt strange because she didn't have a sister. Soon after, Sayatome lost consciousness. The girl fainted, leaning against Shirayuki, but Shirayuki pushed Sayatome away from him. Not long passed. Sayatome finally regained consciousness, but to her surprise, what she saw was not a starry sky but the bottom of a dark ravine. Sayatome was tied to the Otoko cliff sign that pointed down the ravine. Sayatome was shocked by her condition. Because his target was conscious, Shirayuki then came out of hiding. The young man then turned Sayatome to face him. He laughed, seeing his target could do nothing but scream in the mountain. Sayatome was annoyed and asked what exactly was on her. Shirayuki calmly said that the object was the sign for Otoko cliff. Sayatome was furious because that was not the answer she wanted from Shirayuki. She wanted to know why Shirayuki did that to her. Shirayuki seemed surprised how the soccer club kids were really hopeless. Shirayuki brought a soccer ball. He said that they were not allowed to bring anything that had nothing to do with the training camp. Sayatome became even angrier seeing Shirayuki getting further away. She asked again why Shirayuki did such a cruel thing to Sayatome. Without feeling guilty, Shirayuki answered that he got dragged into that nonsense by someone. Shirayuki suddenly turned and faced Sayatome in a position ready to kick the ball. The young man then said that he had a question for the soccer club manager. Shirayuki asked, "Where is the goal?" Sayatome panicked and began looking left and right, searching for the goal. A split second later, Sayatome suspected she knew what Shirayuki meant, but the girl didn't believe that the goal he was referring to was her. Shirayuki didn't answer Sayatome's confirmation, but instead started counting down. Sayatome shouted, asking why Shirayuki kept counting down. Shirayuki, who had finished counting, then said that Sayatome was running out of time. The young man then stated that the goal was Sayatome. Shirayuki took a running start and kicked the ball as hard as he could towards Sayatome. The collision of the ball with the sign where Sayatome was tied put the girl on the edge, and she almost fell into the ravine. Of course, Sayatome was hysterical. When her fate was almost over, she asked why Shirayuki treated her like that. Sayatome almost fell. Shirayuki then cheerfully answered that the reason he treated Sayatome like that was because she was a nuisance. Sayatome seemed to realize something. Suddenly, Ihara appeared to block the ball that almost knocked over the sign supporting Sayatome. The girl was surprised by Ihara's appearance. Ihara asked if Sayatome was hurt. The girl then drifted into tears, begging Ihara to save her. Shirayuki looked surprised. He then asked how Sayatome could ask to be saved from a young man who tried to rape her. Sayatome's actions were dangerous, according to Shirayuki. What if Ihara assaults Sayatome again? At that time, Sayatome spontaneously answered that what Shirayuki said was wrong. Sayatome emphasized that Ihara did not try to rape her. Sayatome stated that she was frustrated because Ihara rejected her. Sayatome admitted that she was lonely and loved Ihara. Sayatome stated that she didn't care about other young men because the only one she cared about was Ihara. Ihara was the only one for Sayatome, and Ihara was the only man Sayatome loved. Sayatome seemed to cry helplessly. Ihara mentioned Sayatome's name once, and Shirayuki laughed softly hearing that. As Shirayuki said, Ihara was indeed unable to do it. Ihara seemed to reprimand Shirayuki. Seeing the situation, Shirayuki intended to take it easy and rest. Shirayuki then left. He left the rest to Ihara. Ihara and Sayatome were left alone on the edge of a Otoko cliff. Sayatome was still crying, and Ihara slowly untied the rope that tied the girl to the Otoko cliff sign. After being released, Sayatome seemed unable to stand. The girl crouched down and cried. Seeing Sayatome's condition made Ahara realize that what Shirayuki said was true. Even though someone like Ahara tried to kill Satome, he would still be the same. Satome got up from her seat and started to approach Ahara. The girl admitted that she was scared, still crying and trying to hug Ahara. Satome apologized for everything that had happened to Ahara. She said that she had truly fallen in love with Ahara. Ahara responded to Sayatome's words with an apology because he would never be able to forgive what Satome had done to him. Satome was shocked. The girl was again hit by the fact that for the second time she had been rejected by Ahara. Ahara left, probably returning to his tent. Satome didn't seem to be aware of herself. When Ahara left, Sayatome's facial expression looked so angry. The girl couldn't understand what Ahara was thinking. Even though Satome had been generous enough to forgive Ahara, she felt that what Ahara did to her was not what she deserved. In her anger, Satome would make sure that Ahara and Shirayuki would never return to school again. The girl wanted to take advantage of her fans, whom she called loyal servants. The next day, Satome dressed up and wanted to take revenge on Ahara and Shirayuki. After finishing dressing, Satome rushed to the soccer club tent. She wanted to take advantage of the young men in the soccer club. But when Satome looked inside the tent, the expressions on the young men's faces looked fierce and unfriendly to Satome. Satome then questioned why the young men had such scary faces. One of the young men then played a recording of Sayatome's confession when she was on the edge of the cliff earlier, about Ahara, who apparently never tried to rape Satome. Sayatome's secret had been revealed. One by one, the young men from the soccer club demanded an explanation of Sayatome's statement in the video with the statements that Satome had said to each of the young men. All the young men had been deceived by Satome. Satome didn't belong to any of the soccer club members, but rather, the rumors were true, saying that Satome had created a soccer club like her harem. Satome tried to calm her loyal servants, but none of them seemed to calm down. That day, it was clear that Sayatome's life was over, at least in the soccer club. Elsewhere, Ahara came to see Shirayuki. He wanted to confirm that the person behind Sayatome's circulating confession video was Shirayuki. Shirayuki then asked Ahara how he knew. Shirayuki said that the video wasn't his doing, but what was certain was that Satome was gone. Ahara was stunned. The young man then sat down in relief. Ahara had thought that Shirayuki was really serious, killing Satome. Shirayuki then responded so that Ahara wouldn't misunderstand him. Shirayuki was indeed capable of killing Satome. However, the condition for that to happen was that it was done for the only person Shirayuki loved. Hearing Shirayuki's statement made Ahara blush. It seemed that the young man also misunderstood, thinking that Shirayuki liked him when, in fact, the words were directed at someone else. Ahara was confused about how to react to Shirayuki's words, but Shirayuki then spoke again. If he really killed Satome, it would be a big problem at camp. Camp would be cancelled if that happened, and of course Ahara could be suspected because the camp was the only event Ahara attended. Ahara was even more flattered when Shirayuki sounded like he was really thinking about him. Shirayuki then said that Haruki seemed very happy when Ahara came to camp. More than anything, that girl casually touched Haruki in the hallway. Shirayuki didn't like that. Ahara still didn't understand why Shirayuki suddenly mentioned Haruki's name in their conversation. Shirayuki then suddenly brought his face closer to Ahara. Ahara was uneasy. His heart wasn't ready. Shirayuki approached because he wanted Ahara to keep Haruki's mouth shut about what Shirayuki had done to Satome. After saying that, Shirayuki then left, leaving Ahara, who was still stunned. Ahara still didn't understand Shirayuki's way of thinking. At night during the campfire, the students seemed happy to gather around the campfire. Haruki was also there, not to mention Shirayuki. Shirayuki then whispered to Haruki, saying that there was something he wanted to show him. Haruki was quite curious about what it was and finally obediently went with Shirayuki. Ahara didn't seem to notice Haruki leaving with Shirayuki. The two of them started to enter the Otoko factory area. Haruki wondered what Shirayuki wanted to show him. Shirayuki was still reluctant to say and asked Haruki to just keep following him. Haruki was worried about the bandage on Shirayuki's leg, but the bandage had been removed a day ago. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the edge of the cliff. Shirayuki wanted to show Haruki the view of the night sky. Haruki looked very amazed to see the night sky studded with stars. Shirayuki then asked about Haruki's opinion. He said that there is a belief that if a couple confesses their feelings under the Milky Way, then they will be happy together forever. Haruki seemed unaware of this belief. Suddenly, Shirayuki expressed his feelings for Haruki. Shirayuki said that he had liked Haruki since the first time they met. In the bushes, Ihara observed the two of them secretly. He just realized that Shirayuki actually liked Haruki. Thus, it can be concluded that everything Shirayuki did before was so that his plan to see the Milky Way with Haruki would not be disturbed. Back to Shirayuki and Haruki. After expressing his feelings, Shirayuki asked what Haruki thought of him. Haruki seemed to have difficulty answering. Seeing Haruki's confusion, Shirayuki was actually amazed. Shirayuki approached Haruki. His hand touched the young man's cheek, and then Shirayuki gently told the young man he liked that Haruki didn't need to force himself to say anything at that time. However, next time, Haruki had to say it properly. Haruki blushed and was nervous. He responded that the next time he would really say it. After being satisfied enough, the two of them decided to go back, so as not to get scolded by the teachers. Ihara was left alone. The young man looked hesitant while holding a soccer ball. Ihara was confused and felt indebted to Shirayuki. He hadn't had a chance to say thank you. The next day their school trip was over. The students had to go back. Haruki again carried Shirayuki's bag, even though Shirayuki was fine, and even tried to carry his own bag, rather than bothering him. Haruki seemed to be struggling, even though this time the road was downhill. Suddenly, Ihara appeared in their midst. Haruki was surprised while Shirayuki felt like a new rival had appeared. Ihara was there not to compete but to help. He happily took Shirayuki's bag from Haruki's grasp and helped carry it. Ihara had tidied up his appearance so that his charm was now clearly visible in the eyes of the girls. Haruki and Shirayuki were still looking at Ihara, who was walking in front of them. Ihara felt like he now understood Shirayuki's feelings, where he was willing to do anything for the person he liked. Ihara, if I'm not mistaken, liked Shirayuki. He didn't care even though he knew that Shirayuki liked Haruki. While on the bus, Shirayuki sat right next to Haruki. Not long after they were on the bus, Haruki remembered his house key. He had forgotten it. When he arrived home, his parents were still at work. However, Haruki had a Kari. He just had to call his sister to have the door opened. Shirayuki then thought that having siblings came in handy. Hearing Shirayuki talk about siblings, Haruki suddenly became curious and asked how many members Shirayuki had in his family. Shirayuki was quite surprised when Haruki suddenly asked that. It didn't seem sudden because previously Haruki had said that he didn't know anything about Shirayuki. Haruki remembered that he didn't know anything about Shirayuki's family. Shirayuki said that Haruki was free to ask him anything. At that time, Shirayuki's parents had passed away, and now he lived with his grandmother. Haruki was quite surprised when he found out that both of Shirayuki's parents had passed away. His mother died of illness while his father died in an accident. Shirayuki also said that he had a younger brother who is 2 years younger than Shirayuki. Flashback to Shirayuki and his younger brother's past. Shirayuki's younger brother was named Nanami. When he came home from school, Nanami often looked at the garden and saw the flowers growing well. He really wanted to show it to his brother. Shirayuki also often picked Nanami up when he came home from school. Nanami would be beaming with joy when he saw his beloved brother coming to pick his up. Seeing his brother fixated on the flower garden made Shirayuki ask if it was possible that his brother had planted those plants. Nanami then confirmed it. He had planted and cared for all the plants there. The plant that Nanami planted at that time was salvia. In the language of flowers, salvia means respect, wisdom, and family love. Hearing his brother's precise explanation made Nanami even more amazed by Shirayuki. Nanami thought Shirayuki really understood the meaning he put into those flowers. The siblings' time together was suddenly interrupted by the arrival of a girl who had business with Shirayuki. The girl said that Shirayuki had been called by the teacher. The teacher wanted the cleaning committee's inspection record redone. The girl wanted Shirayuki to listen to her if their sensei said that the inspection was supposed to be done in pairs. Shirayuki looked confused while the girl who was talking to him looked enthusiastic. The girl even casually joked with Shirayuki. Nanami didn't like seeing that. She didn't want her brother touched by just anyone. The girl asked Shirayuki to hurry up. He just realized that Nanami was there. Nanami just stayed silent, reluctant to respond. The girl suddenly squatted next to Nanami, looking at the flowers in front of them. The girl was amazed and asked if perhaps the young man liked flowers. Nanami felt nauseous. The girl next to him kept making small talk, while Nanami tried hard to control himself. Nanami felt so disgusted because the girl smelled so sweet. Seeing how his brother was, Shirayuki then took Nanami's place, answering the girl's questions. The girl then again invited Shirayuki to immediately do their task. The girl took Shirayuki's hand while apologizing to Nanami for having to borrow Shirayuki for a moment. Because he couldn't finish, Shirayuki had no choice but to follow obediently. Before leaving, Shirayuki told Nanami to wait for him there. Nanami was not allowed to go home alone. Nanami was left alone while the girl who brought his brother seemed happy. Even though Shirayuki claimed to have done his job, the girl insisted they should do the inspection together. Nanami was still curled up. The boy could only breathe a sigh of relief when the girl was no longer visible. Nanami felt bad. Seeing how the girl always buzzed around his brothers like that made Nanami sick and started destroying the plants that had grown healthy because of his care. The garden was destroyed. Nanami had forgotten his emotions. Even her shoes were now stained with dirty soil. Nanami returned home alone. There was no response when greeted. Nanami entered and left his dirty shoes in the footwell. Nanami looked heartless. The young man hurried up to his bed in the bedroom. On the top bunk, Nanami curled up, hugging a pillow and continuously calling Shirayuki's name. The reason why Nanami could be so angry was because the figure he liked was not flowers but Shirayuki. When Nanami was still thinking about Shirayuki, his mind was startled by the voice of a man who seemed surprised to see Nanami's shoes so dirty covered in mud. Nanami was then alert to the man's arrival. Not long after the girl was heard by the angry man's screams echoing in the house. Nanami was afraid, but he also realized that if he cried, the angry man would only get more upset. Nanami clenched his fists tightly. His feelings were confused about how to act. He knew that if he showed his fear, then the angry man would take advantage of it. The angry man knew that the muddy shoes in front belonged to Nanami. The man came in and slapped Nanami hard, asking what he meant by Nanami's dirty shoes. Nanami didn't answer, not because he was reluctant, but because the angry man's slaps hadn't stopped. The man was so angry because the entrance was so filthy on a sunny day without rain. Nanami hadn't answered and was still receiving the angry man's blows, even to the point of a nosebleed. The man became even more furious, questioning how Nanami could still manage to mess up. The angry man pulled Nanami's hair to get a closer look. From there, Nanami realized that the man had come home in a tipsy state again. How was it not enough with slaps, punches, and hair pulling? The angry man also still kicked Nanami. Nanami was called nasty things, and even compared to her deceased mother. The man also said that the only reason he married Nanami's mother was because she had a pretty face, but it was useless because she still went and died without being useful for anything. Nanami really tried so hard to act better. Yesterday he got hit for looking away and ignoring him, so even if he is scared, Nanami has to keep looking. Shaking Nanami tried to be brave enough to keep looking at his father, but just like yesterday, he was still treated roughly by his father. The boy's collar was even pulled until he was lifted and his breath was choked. When Nanami was almost hit again by his father, Shirayuki arrived there asking what they were doing, with a flat expression as if nothing had happened. Their father then stopped and released his grip until Nanami fell to the floor. Shirayuki again asked about all the commotion of his father. The father then said that Nanami was acting up again, and this time he made the house dirty with mud from his shoes. Therefore, their father took action to give a little lesson in discipline. Shirayuki crouched down, seeing Nanami's still trembling condition. He then cheerfully told his father that Nanami is working really hard as the class animal caretaker. Nanami is making lots of flowers bloom in the school's flower bed, and the teachers speak very highly of Nanami. Hearing this explanation, their father was shocked. Shirayuki said that he would be the one cleaning the entrance, so Shirayuki asked his father to let Nanami go for that time. Their father refused. He still felt good teaching Nanami a proper, strict lesson. Suddenly, their father smelled an appetizing aroma. He then snatched the plastic bag containing the cartilage skewers that Shirayuki bought when stopping by the yakitori place in front of the station. Their father then stroked Shirayuki's head because he was so happy. Shirayuki was really considerate, just like his late mom. In his mind, Nanami was confused. How could his father treat and say different things about their mother when their mother was the same person? The father left and intended to drink again. Shirayuki and Nanami returned to their room. Shirayuki had told Nanami that they should go home together. It was not without reason. but because if they were together, then Shirayuki could protect Nanami. If they were separated, Shirayuki could not do anything. Nanami could not deny it because what his brother said was true. Shirayuki approached Nanami to see the condition of his brother's face, which was swollen up here and there. Nanami was about to leave for a moment to get a cold towel, but Nanami held his back. He did not want his brother to be involved with that person again. Shirayuki was then surprised and did not understand the meaning of Nanami's words. Nanami again clarified that the person he meant was Shirayuki's classmate, the girl who came to call Shirayuki earlier when he was about to go home from school. Shirayuki then asked why Nanami wanted Shirayuki to act like that, but Nanami only answered that he would not tell the reason. Shirayuki then questioned why Nanami suddenly cried. In the midst of her tears, Nanami asked Shirayuki about which was more important to Shirayuki between Nanami and a girl in his class. Shirayuki seemed to understand the direction of the conversation. He then laughed. Nanami was still uneasy because he was sure Shirayuki must have thought Nanami was just asking some dumb question that makes no sense. Shirayuki laughed even harder until tears came out. He didn't think like what Nanami just said. On the contrary, Shirayuki wondered why his brother still asked something that Nanami already knew the answer to. Shirayuki held Nanami's face gently, making the boy look at his brother. Shirayuki then answered that of course Nanami was more important to Shirayuki. Nanami was then touched. Suddenly, a woman arrived at their house. The woman seemed to complain when she saw someone she didn't expect had come home. The woman accidentally saw Nanami and Shirayuki in the room. She then complained about why the children had already gone home and weren't still at school. The woman was called Fujiko. Shirayuki explained to Fujiko that the one Fujiko had been waiting for had finally arrived. Hearing this, Fujiko looked happy. Shirayuki suggested that Fujiko hurry up and go to her room, and of course Fujiko seemed enthusiastic and immediately went to her room. However, Fujiko came back. She was only joking and pretended to obey Shirayuki's advice. Fujiko seemed very fed up with Shirayuki's calm face, and the way Shirayuki acted like adults were too easy to manipulate. It really made Fujiko annoyed. Fujiko knew that Shirayuki could handle his father well, but that wouldn't apply to Fujiko, the woman said. Shirayuki fell silent before acting as if he were gloomy and sad. He apologized because he didn't mean to act like what Fujiko said. Shirayuki said that his father seemed very lonely since their mother died. Because of that, Shirayuki just thought that Fujiko would definitely make their father's situation better. For that reason, Fujiko suggested coming directly to their father. Fujiko was increasingly annoyed by that kind of smooth-talking attitude from Shirayuki. Fujiko pulled Shirayuki's chin to see the boy's face more clearly. Fujiko was truly amazed how Shirayuki's face could look like a beautiful girl's. Shirayuki looked exactly like his gloomy mother in their memorial photo. The smile immediately disappeared from Shirayuki's face. Fujiko wondered how Shirayuki could have such a girlish face when Shirayuki knew nothing about women. Shirayuki remained silent even when Fujiko offered to change Shirayuki into a man. Fujiko forcibly grabbed Shirayuki's hand. No matter how mature Shirayuki acted, he was still just a fifth grader. Fujiko bet Shirayuki had never touched the real assets of a woman. Fujiko tried to direct Shirayuki's hand, which was gripped by her, to her own assets. The woman seemed to enjoy playing with Shirayuki. She let him to touch her as much as he wanted.